And there is the live stream. There it is. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Network Plus Study Group for July 2017. It's the pre-show, which is why you're looking at the back of my head, which is admittedly not a fantastic view, but it'll be different. It'll be like this later on. So don't worry. You won't. I get emails sometimes. People say, I tried watching, but all it was a back of your head. You got to stick around. This is the pre-show. We're going to start in about 10 minutes. So if you wanted to fast forward, if you're watching the replay, you'll be able to watch as the start time. And if this is more than a day after we've done this, you will also have timestamps on the YouTube timestamp video description. There'll be timestamps. And you'll know exactly when this is going to happen because you can just click on it, which is nice. So we are going to do Network Plus today. It's all Q&A for the first hour. In the second hour, I'll just open up the phone lines. It's open phone lines. They don't have to be Network Plus questions. Sometimes they're career questions. Sometimes they're about other certifications. Sometimes they're about what I'm doing on Xbox these days. It's just, you never know what's going to hit, what's going to be interesting. We've got this study group starting. So that'll be this Wednesday. Next Wednesday is the Security Plus study group. We'll have that study group and then not another study group until the next month, I guess. Is that how it works? I guess so. So I'm looking at some of my displays here, getting weird stuff on my auxiliary line. That's odd that it is flickering like that on my aux display. I'm going to have a look at that. I might need a firmware upgrade. I know none of that makes any sense at all. I'm watching things. They're just above the screen here. You can kind of see the edge of my television there. It just flashed. See that flash just happened? That's not supposed to happen on my auxiliary display. So I'm wondering if I should bring certain things up later than newer. It's difficult to go through this. I don't want to change it now. Which one is that? That's the second line. So I'm not too concerned about that. It's not flickering on the main view. It ultimately is flickering on my recording, which is okay because I only use my recording for audio. So that's what that's about. Yep, welcome to the chat room. By the way, there is no chat on YouTube. If you are watching this over on the YouTube side, no chat there. You'll need to go over to professormesser.com/live where Pam is in the chat room and has started things off with a test message. So we know it's working, Pam. We know things are okay. We know it's exactly where it should be. We've got Network Plus today. In fact, I bring all of this stuff up at about 2 hours before we go live. I power everything up. I make sure everything's working. That way, if something has gone very awry, I would have 2 hours to hopefully be able to fix it. I was going through the questions today and realized my questions were not done. I had skipped the performance-based question, so I had to do that. That was tough. That was not good. Network Plus study group. I'll put the link into the main chat so that people can find it. Here we go. And the folks in the main chat know that something's going on there. Welcome, chat room. Matt and Corey have arrived. K-Max, yes, it's working. It is all good, Fred. We're doing things. We're getting things going. I think there's something going on with the way the video goes through my video switcher. I got to figure that out later on because I will want to record some more content, and that needs to not flicker like that. So I got to work on that. Maybe a firmware upgrade. It may be a bug in the. I haven't looked to see if I have a newer version of firmware available for this, though. I think it checks when I turn it on. There's software. See if I can bring up the software. You can see it on this screen. This is the software for that control panel. Let's see. Does it have a check for that? There's an about. No, there really isn't. I wonder if it checks. I think it does. Under my preferences, it says nothing about that. Did I see all the preferences, though? I don't think I did. We'll figure it out later on. Now's not the time to be messing around with the video switcher. I'm just saying. Probably not the best time to be doing that. Not a good idea. We got about 5 minutes to go. Thank you for being here. Clearly, old people are allowed here because I'm here. So yes, a computer has no idea how old you are. So that's one of the benefits of technology is it doesn't know that you're getting old. What's the deal with this computer? It doesn't know. All it knows is what we type into it. So, or say into it, or mouse click into it. I don't know. It's one of the benefits, I think, of technology is it fits for pretty much anybody. Also doesn't know how young you are. You don't have to be someone in a corporate position somewhere to be able to work with computers. I got plenty of people watching who are high school students getting their certifications, figuring it all out. I think that's always good. That is always good. We got about 4 minutes to go. I've got probably a good idea to go through a quick camera check. I'm going through my camera check on my side. You know what I haven't done? Let's do one of these quick checks. Yep, that's us. That's today. And let's quick check. Yep, that looks good. Okay. It's all good in the neighborhood. We've got that running. This can probably now transition over to the presentation. There we go. We've got, what else? I think we're good. Hopefully we'll be able to make that happen. I always worry about the stream, something not happening with the stream or something not working right. Sometimes we do run into issues with technical problems. I think I've got a pretty good workflow at this point of all of the different pieces. I really need to document that. Here's how we stream, because I've been thinking of doing other streams, like on earlier this year, LinkedIn announced that they were doing a streaming service. I, of course, put in an application for that streaming service, and they said, well, we're not taking anybody more on their streaming service. So didn't work out. So we're going to keep streaming through the YouTube. Hopefully, if they allow more streamers, I can stream over there as well. But that's where you start changing the formula. You start creating a new stream of video that needs to go to a different video provider. So that would go to someone else. That's one of the challenges with doing this is it just needs more bandwidth, more bandwidth, more bandwidth. You never know what you're going to need. I have this challenge that all of this is on a cable modem. So I have a lot of options for increasing downstream bandwidth. I don't have a lot of options for increasing the upstream. And I've got a pretty good sized upstream now. I could fit I think I could fit 2 more streams. These are 1080p streams. These are significant streams. I think I could fit 2 more in the existing connection, but you don't want to push it. You don't want to create too much contention. So you never know how that's going to go. I was considering doing 4K, and interestingly enough, the problem with, because I can absolutely stream 4K. This video display you're seeing here in my studio is a 4K video. And I can stream 4K to YouTube, no problem. The equipment that I have for streaming absolutely supports it, but it creates a delay. What I'm sending is a single stream to YouTube. YouTube takes that stream and re-renders it into a form that YouTube likes and then sends that form to you. So they create a 1080p version of the stream. They create a 720p version of the stream. They create a 480. They create a 360. They create all of these different sizes and optimize it for the platform that you're watching on. And that's easy. I just send them one thing, and then they have to do the re-rendering of the video. But that takes time. It takes seconds to do that. Their current platform, it takes seconds to do that. And your delay, you're seeing this really only about 10 seconds after I say it. When I go to 4K, that 10-second number increases to about 20 to 30 seconds. And when we're doing interactive Q&A, 20 to 30 seconds is difficult because I ask the question and I don't start seeing your answers until 30 seconds later. So I have to talk a little bit. I have to now give you enough time to answer, and it kind of extends the entire process another minute, minute and a half. So that's why I am not currently doing 4K. So there you go. That's the story. But they will eventually get better at this. Speaking of getting better at this, it's time to start. Be nice if we actually were able to do a study group today. Folks in the chat room already telling me, are we going to do a chat? Yes, we are absolutely going to do a study group. Let's do one right now, everybody. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the July 2019 Professor Messer Network Plus Study Group. This is the one for July of 2019. We are well into half the year at this point, and we're going to do all Network Plus Q&A during this first hour of the study group. My name is James Messer. I will be your host for this first hour of Network Plus Q&A, where I will ask you questions online. You will interactively be able to answer them. You'll be able to lock in your answers online. We'll get to see how everybody does with the questions that I have. We've got plenty of content to go through as well. I can't wait to get through all of the different questions that I've created for you. It's a whole new set of questions every month. I make them fresh and new just for you. And in the second half, we'll get rid of the questions, and we'll turn this around, and you'll ask me the questions. I'll open up the phone lines. We'll take questions from the chat room, and you can ask me really anything you'd like. It's an open phone line. You can ask me Network Plus questions. You can ask me certifications or industry questions, or you can ask me anything about anything, really. I don't know if I'll have an answer for you, but I'll absolutely take your questions. So that's something we'll just have to see how it goes. So I look forward to sticking around and hearing from you in that second hour. There's a lot going on here. We've got plenty of new content that's in the works, plenty of things we're making for you. We, of course, do these study groups for you every month. If you'd like to keep track of what's going on, you can follow us on all of the social media things. ProfessorMesser.com / the social media, / Twitter, / YouTube, / Instagram, / Facebook. And recently, / LinkedIn. I made a LinkedIn page yesterday. I don't know why it took me so long to make a LinkedIn page for Professor Messer, but I made one. So now you can go to ProfessorMesser.com / LinkedIn, and that one's there too. You'll notice on Instagram, I tried something new last week, which was my Q&A in an Instagram format. Because with Instagram, you have you can swipe to the left and see the next picture. So I put the question on one picture and the answer on the other. So they're kind of like flashcards. You can see how that goes. And I liked it so much that we're going to make a bunch of those, and we're just going to keep putting them out on the Instagram. Yes, there's no followers out on LinkedIn for those of you that are watching live, because it just made it, you just heard about it. I didn't tell anybody. It was a big secret until right now. It wasn't really a secret, but that's where we were with it. I'm able to do these study groups thanks to your support. You watch every single one of my videos. And of course, I put all of my training classes, every minute of every video, on the YouTube. And you can get all of the index of those on a YouTube playlist or from my website. And you can, of course, go through and view every single one of those. I will also sell an offline version of those. So you can get video, audio, my course notes all bundled together, or any one of those particular things. You can learn all about it at ProfessorMesser.com / GetNetPlus. I also make a video replay of this available. It's available immediately afterwards. Once I hit the stop button, it only takes a few minutes for YouTube to process the video, and then you can watch the replay on YouTube immediately, which is really nice. Some of you would like an audio version of this. So you have a podcast version, and maybe you have a podcast catching program, some podcast app that you're using that will automatically download new content when it's available. That's what I do with my podcast application. So I have, of course, links to the RSS feed or real-time abilities to stream this audio at ProfessorMesser.com / podcast for my A+ Network Plus and Security Plus study groups. I mentioned in the pre-show that there is a whole set of timestamps that will be available about a day or so after this. My marketing manager, Lori, hi Lori, she gets to watch this and put timestamps on the YouTube description. So later on, if you're thinking, what did he say about that particular question, or what was the caller that I heard about, you can go back to this timestamp list, just click the time, and it will move you directly to that spot in the video. She's been doing that now for quite some time. Has it been a year? Probably about at least. Really useful. I find it useful for indexing myself. Hopefully you will too when you go back and watch those replays. Today we're going to talk all about Network Plus. The current Network Plus exam is the N10007. That's the current number. So make sure that all of your study materials have that number. If they show that it's an N10006 or an N10005 or some other number, you do not have the most recent study materials. Make sure you always study from materials that match the version of the exam that you're going to take, and the version of the exam that you will be taking right now is the N10007. It was released in March of 2018, so it's been around just over a year now. So it's relatively new in the life cycle. Usually these exams stick around about 3 years. So if you have started studying, this is the exam that you will be taking. Hopefully it won't take you 2 more years to get your exam done. It's a 90-minute exam. They could give you a maximum of 90 questions. There could be fewer, but a max of 90 is what it will top out at. And you will get multiple choice questions, which are nice to have on the exams. You're accustomed to multiple choice where you get a question and then you get answer A, answer B, answer C, or answer D. But the CompTIA exams also give you a handful of questions at the very beginning that CompTIA calls performance-based questions. These performance-based questions are anything but multiple choice questions. So these could be questions that have a matching component. They could be asking you to perform a function at the command line. They might be fill in the blank. They might be having you list things out from highest to lowest or fastest to slowest. You never know exactly what it's going to be, but the topic of the question will always come from the CompTIA exam objectives. Those objectives you can always find at professormesser.com/objectives, and I redirect you over to the CompTIA website where you can download those. It's always good to have the objectives. If you have not downloaded those, that should be the first thing you do with your studies and should probably be the last thing you look through before you go into the exam. It tells you everything you need to know to pass that exam. So that is one of our frequently asked questions, and we were just able to answer it right there. We're going to do interactive Q&A. I'm going to ask you some of these questions from these objective lists, and you're going to answer them. So to answer them, pop open a new browser window and go to this URL, www.professormesser.com/QA. So that's the site you want to go to. It will redirect you to the Socrative site where a question is waiting for you right now. You'll be able to answer that question as you are waiting. There's also an app that you can download for your mobile device. Get it on the Google Play Store, get it on the App Store at Apple. So this is one where you're looking for the Socrative Student app. And it will probably ask you, for a room name. The room name is Professor Messer. Make sure you spell it right, PROFESSORMESSER. That's a good way to do it. So make sure that you look through and get the right app and you put the right name in so that you're able to answer the question. And if you do all of that and it worked properly, here is what you will see. It's a question from last month. So if you were here last month, this should look familiar. We put this question in to see if you're able to get into the room and answer the questions properly. The question asks, a company is building out a new floor of a building and is running network cables from each desk to the IDF. How should these wires terminate in the IDF? And I have some options available to you. Those options are an RJ45 wall jack into a concentrator, a 66 block directly into the switch, or a 110 block. And you can see everyone who's answering those questions right now. If you were here last month, or maybe it's a question that is just obvious for everyone, we can see that 78% of you have answered 110 block, and it's single digits for everything else. Nobody else is even thinking about doing that. So hopefully that's one, whenever you start looking at all of the different options available, that's the one 80% of you have chosen is the 110 block. Is it really the 110 block? Well, some of you have not even thought about how these floors of desks are wired. Out on a floor, you have all these cubes or offices or people that are at a desk. And every single one of those desks, for the most part, I guess there are a few people that do have wireless, completely wireless environments. But for the most part, I would say most people have a wired environment. So there's at least a cable that goes from a desk into an IDF, into a patch panel. And the reason we have this patch panel here is because people tend to move around. New people come in. People move to a different desk. People move to different departments. There's constant changes. What we call in the corporate world a MAC, a move and add and change. That's not the MAC you might be thinking about. because we need another abbreviation, MAC, don't we? So the move, add, and change has people moving all the time. But if we take a wire from a desk and have that wire go into a patch panel that never moves, then we never have to touch that wire again, which is pretty important when you're talking about these big runs of wire. But of course, people are moving around. We have all these moves, adds, and changes. So you can run from the other side of the patch panel. There's usually either a punch down connection. In this particular picture, it's an RJ45 connection where you can use a simple Ethernet patch cable. That's why we call it a patch cable, because it comes from a patch panel to your switch. And we can plug everybody into the switch connections that they need. Then if somebody moves, adds, or changes, we can simply unplug it from the switch and plug it into a different interface. Well, that makes it easy. So you never have to touch that big run all the way to someone's desk. You simply redirect them where you need to go on the other side of the patch panel. Makes it very easy to make a change, very quick to make a change. You don't have to run any cables back. Everything is marked. You usually have a connection on one end that's marked desk number 13, and then there's a 110 block interface number 13. So you know exactly what desk goes with what interface. Very useful to have that functionality in that. So in the IDF, you need that Category 5 plus type of patch connector, and it's a patch panel that is commonly referred to as a 110 block. That is the name of the block that is commonly used with Category 5 and higher. If you were using older equipment or you had really old equipment in your data center, you probably would see some 66 blocks, but those 66 blocks can't support the speeds we need for the latest versions of Ethernet and the speeds that we require. So the 110 block usually has this patch on the back. So you're punching down these wires that are coming from the end user. And on the other side of the block is either another set of punch downs like this, or it's something that's easy to work with, like an RJ45 connection. So if you were one of the people that answered 110 block, that is the right answer. Answer E is that 80% of you got that one right. You must have been here last week, or you're really, really familiar with working with patch panels inside of an IDF. Maybe you are. Well, let's see how you do with these next questions then. Looks like everybody's in. You're able to answer these questions. Let's do another question. Really, this is our first question of the study group. It's the first new question of the study group anyway. One of the things that I always like to do at the beginning of the study group is a performance-based question, because when you take your Network Plus exam, you are also going to get a performance-based question right at the beginning. You'll probably get a handful of them, a number of them. So I have a matching question for you today. So I'm not going to ask you to do command lines today, but I am going to ask you some command line questions in this matching view. So I have 5 different command lines, and I have 5 different functions of these command lines, and they are not matched up properly to each other. So let's look at these 5 command lines. They are traceroute, ping, netstat, dig, and ARP. Those are 5 commands you could be using really at almost any operating system. To be able to use dig, you'd have to download for Windows, but everything else is in Windows and Linux and Mac OS. So these would be useful command lines to know. Traceroute, ping, netstat, dig, and ARP. And here are the 5 different functions. The first one is identify the FQDN of an IP address. The second is verify the MAC address of a device. The third is determine the number of hops between 2 devices. The fourth is view the active sessions on a device. And the last one is check a system for availability. So those are the 5 we are looking at. Those are the 5 things we need to know about. So we need to be able to take traceroute, ping, netstat, dig, and ARP and match it back to those. Now, if you think they're already in the right order, you can put them as 1A, 2B, 3C, 4D, and 5E. Well, they're not matched up right now in order. You have to match them up. So you make sure you don't have to type the whole thing in. You can just give me the number and the letter they are coordinated with, that they are matched with. For those of you listening in, let's go through these 5 things again. The traceroute, the ping, the netstat, the dig, and the ARP are, the first is identify the FQDN of an IP address. Verify the MAC address of a device, determine the number of hops between 2 devices, view the active sessions on a device, and check a system for availability. Those are the 5 things. Now, if you're familiar with these command lines, this may be a very, very easy question for you. If you've never worked with some of these command lines, you might have run into an issue with one or two of these. Now, a matching question is nice because there's an even number on both sides. So if you don't know one of them, but you know the other four, you've effectively got all of them correct. One of the things they like to do on the exam, though, is they give you more than one on the other side. So you may find that you have 5 different command lines and 10 different things to choose from, but you're only using 5 of them. They trick you up like that. They make it hard. Not really a trick. It's more of a difficult scenario that you have to work through. You really have to know your stuff for those. So I try not to do those in the study groups. For those of you asking in the chat room, I don't tend to do that. I have done it with some of the questions, but I don't tend to because we're trying to learn these things as we go. And I don't want to make it too difficult. And quite honestly, I only have so much real estate on the screen as well. Let's not make this more difficult for people listening in. I think we'll focus on getting 5 of these down and we'll be good. Now, I try to turn them over about every year. So if you go back to July of last year, it's also a matching question about command lines, but it's a completely different group of command lines. So there you go. That does happen with this. Let's see how you did with these command lines. We'll go through all 5 of these. The first one was trace route. The answer for trace route was C, which was determine the number of hops between 2 devices. This is an extremely useful function of trace route. If you already know what the route should be between those 2 devices, trace route can also help you know or help you determine where is the route stopping. Why am I not able to communicate to that other device? How far can I go with that particular piece? So you never know what you're going to run into with those pieces. So trace route's very useful to be able to know exactly what route it's going. If you're also having routing issues, you think maybe there's a routing table issue, trace route really useful for doing that too. If you think there's been a number of times where I've set up a router with a wrong route, that I had one router point back to another router, and that router pointed back to that router, and that router pointed back to the other, and you've got a routing loop. So the routers were sending information back and forth. So you perform a trace route, and the trace route shows the packet going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then finally it just would not do it anymore. There's a certain number of routes that the trace route will do. So it maxed out. We were able to see very easily, okay, that's why this wasn't working. We messed up our route. The second in the list was ping. Well, you've probably used ping. Check to see if a system is alive. See if it is at least responding to you. Now, it doesn't mean that everything about this happens to be related to the availability of that device. It could be that you're pinging a web server and the web server is responding over the network, but the server on the web server is not running. So pinging doesn't ensure that the service is operating. It only tells you that that device is on the network and it's at least at the very minimum able to yell back at you and say, yeah, I'm here. What? But it doesn't mean the web service is working. It doesn't mean the database service is working. It just tells you that the machine is at least there and available. The third on our list is netstat. Netstat is very useful for many, many things. I think it does 760 different things. Netstat is a very powerful little utility. The one thing I put in here that does associate it with netstat is that will tell you the number of active sessions that are connecting to you or that you are connecting to. So you're able to see exactly who am I talking to and who is this talking to me. And you're able to see exactly which sessions are up and running. And there's different options there that can even tell you what service or what process is that particular session communicating with on my device. So that's one of the things that you'll find with netstat. Netstat does a lot of things. It will show you a routing table. It will give you information about IPv4 and IPv6. There's a lot of capabilities in netstat. And even on Windows, there's a little bit of Windows functionality built into this. So you can see the Windows executable. If you're on Linux, there's some Linux things in netstat that are useful. Very powerful utility. So spend some time with those. The better you are with netstat, the better you're going to be troubleshooting some of these problems that you run into. Fourth on our list was dig. Can you dig it? I can, because dig will identify the fully qualified domain name of an IP address. Now, you may be thinking, wait, using DNS, I'm typing in the fully qualified domain name, and the server's telling me the IP address. This is actually saying different. I'm identifying the FQDN based on an IP address, and you can do both of those to the DNS server. Dig allows you to do that along. There's other utilities, the ones that you will see in Network Plus. Dig is certainly one that you run into. Being able to do an NS lookup is the other common one, and part of the list of things you need to know on the Network Plus exam objectives. That's the name server lookup. NS lookup, for some reason, is becoming deprecated if it is not already. And so DIG is what everybody should be using going forward. DIGS also gives you a little bit more detail of what's there. It's a pretty useful utility. It's a little bit easier to use than NS lookup too. So I can see why we might want to go to that. You'll notice though that DIG is not available in Windows. It doesn't ship with Windows, but there is a DIG available for Windows. If you download, I think it is the bind, the Berkeley Internet Name Daemon. Did I get the name right? It's bind, B-I-N-D. If you download bind for Windows, which is a name server that you can install, in that package, in the zip file that you'll download, is dig.exe. So you can copy that dig.exe onto your machine and use dig from your computer, which is really nice. The last one on our list is ARP. Well, the only thing we got left is answer B, which is verify the MAC address of a device. If you are trying to determine how things are mapped on a particular system, what IP address is associated with what MAC address and vice versa, the ARP command can tell you that information. Pretty useful to have ARP. If you're trying to troubleshoot especially a problem on the local network, you try pinging a device, you're not getting a response. Is it because the device is having a network problem, or are you not even able to understand what the MAC address of that device is? ARP will tell you the answer to that question. So quickly go through these one more time. Traceroute determines the number of hops between two devices. Ping is check a system for availability. Netstat is view the active sessions on a device. Dig is identify the fully qualified domain name of an IP address. And ARP is verify the MAC address of a device. Hopefully you got all 5 of those, or you got 4 of those, and then the 5th one you got because you got the other 4, which always helps. On your actual exam, as I mentioned, they could ask you more. They could give you more answers than you will use, which is very common. But what you'll also find is you never know if you're getting partial credit, because you could have gotten 2 of these right and all of the rest of them wrong. Well, does CompTIA give you credit for that? We don't know. On the frequently asked questions on the CompTIA website, they say sometimes, we might. There could be a chance of that. But they won't tell you definitively if you're getting the full credit, partial credit, or no credit. They just don't tell you. So you're going to have to just do the best you can on the exam, and whatever happens with the results of the exam is the results. You don't get to see how they work the numbers under the surface on any of the questions. So concentrate on knowing the content, focus on getting those questions right. You're going to do fine on the final exam. Let's do another question. Let's go back to multiple choice, shall we? Our first multiple choice question of the day asks this. Let me click it on your side so you can see it. And it says, a network administrator suspects that a Category 6 cable may have been damaged by some recent construction. Unfortunately, the cables run through the wall and ceiling, and it's not possible to visually inspect the cable. Which of these tools would be able to identify any issues and their distance along the cable? I guess the issues, where the issues are along the cable. So there are 5 options available for doing this. This is a real world one, isn't it? The answers are tone generator, cable tester, OTDR, crimper, or TDR. Those are your 5 different options. Tone generator, cable tester, OTDR, crimper, and TDR. So you've got 5 of those to choose from. If you think you know the answer, go to ProfessorMesser.com/QA, which stands for, I don't know what that stands for. ProfessorMesser.com/QA. We'll have to figure that out. So those are your possible answers. This is ripped from the headlines. This is my world that I have had to deal with before, where there's been cable that has been Category 6 cable that's been damaged by some recent construction. Unfortunately, the cables run through the wall and the ceiling. You can't see the cable. Which of these tools would be able to identify any issues and their distance along the cable? Hopefully. Yes, people are explaining to me that QA stands for question and answer. Thank you. Thank you for that. At least somebody's listening. I think sometimes I throw those in just to see, is anybody really paying attention to this? Let's see if somebody is. Yes, it is QA. Let's see how we did with this one. I'm going to let some other folks answer this one, but your possible answers were tone generator, cable tester, OTDR, crimper, and TDR. This is one where if you're able to, you run into these problems. I ran into this problem recently, and it was not with a corporate network. It was with my home network. It was with the cable going out to a camera. So all the cameras these days are power over Ethernet. There's just a single Ethernet line. It handles the power. It handles the data, and it went dead. It just disappeared. It went away. So where did it go away? Well, I needed a particular tool to tell me what was the problem and how far along the line was that an issue. And if we look at our list, 49% of you say, well, that's a TDR. That's what you should be using. 23% of you said it's a cable tester. It's what you want to use. 17% said tone generator. 12% said OTDR, and 0% said crimper. Nobody thought it was a crimper. 0%. So it's those four: the TDR, the cable tester, the tone generator, and the OTDR. No single digits on this one. So we're all trying to figure out the best tool to use in this scenario. Let's see if we know what it happens to be. What you're going to want to get your hands on is a time domain reflectometer. If this was a fiber connection, then it would be an optical time domain reflectometer. So this would be a TDR, or for fiber, an OTDR. Well, we know this is category 6, so it's not a fiber connection. It would be a TDR to be able to do this. Now, why is it a TDR and not one of those other options? TDR, pretty useful tool, a pretty expensive tool, but a pretty useful tool to be able to have this. It's able to estimate the cable length. Even if nothing's wrong with the cable, you can put a TDR on one side and the little sensor that comes with it on the other side. You click a button, it tells you how long the cable is. Really nice to have that functionality. If there's a problem somewhere down the line, it will tell you if there's a broken wire, or if the wire has been cut and put back together again. You can find the impedance of the cable. You can get a lot of detail about how much signal is really lost between the time it left the TDR and got to the other end, which is really useful if you're trying to find, why are my CRC errors, my cyclical redundancy check? Why is my CRC errors incrementing? I shouldn't be having this problem. Maybe it's a signal issue. Maybe it's going over something and losing signal, like those pieces, like a fluorescent light might cause a signal loss, for example. And ultimately, it allows you to certify cable installations and identify any breaks in the cable or the fiber. A really, really useful tool to have. The way this operates is you would have an electrical pulse that is sent down the cable, and there's a reflection that comes back to the device. Here's what it looks like. You've got this pulse going down the cable. If it hits a problem, whoop, it sends a little bit of that signal back. So there's a little bump in that comes back to the TDR that tells the TDR, oh, wait a second, I had a little problem here. I noticed I got a little reflection back. There must be a problem. And based on how long it took to come back to me, I'm estimating that it takes this long to be able to go through the network and be able to work with this. That's what you need to think about whenever you're working with these TDRs. They can be very, very useful, but they're not something you can simply plug in and you know how to work. It takes a little bit of time to become familiar with these. The TDR is the right answer in this case, though. 48% of you did choose the TDR. 22% of you said cable tester. And I guess in a very broad term, a TDR is a cable tester, but generally when you're using the term cable tester, you're talking about a device that provides a very rudimentary information. It provides you with, does pin 1 connect to pin 1? Does pin 2 connect to pin 2? Does pin 3 connect to pin 3? And that's it. You don't really get anything more than that from a cable tester. It really just shows continuity. We should just call it continuity tester because that's really all a cable tester is. You've got some other options here. 16% of you said tone generator. A tone generator, very useful for finding a cable, especially when there's a group of cables together. The tone generator can help you find exactly the cable you're looking for. But the tone generator doesn't tell you anything about the health of the cable. It doesn't tell you if there's any breaks, if there's any cable connections that are in the wrong pins. It doesn't give you any information about the quality of that cable. It only tells you what the two ends are. perhaps before you plug in the TDR, you use the tone generator to find the two ends of the cable so you can plug in the TDR and the sensor that goes to the other end. That becomes pretty useful. And the last in here is 13% said the OTDR is the optical time domain reflectometer, which is the TDR used for fiber. In this case, we said that this was category 6 cable, so therefore the OTDR would not apply. And of course, a crimper is used to put the RJ45 connector onto the end of the cable. In my particular case, my TDR told me that the problem was at the very end of the cable. I went outside, and the person that had installed the cable did not have a cable that went far enough, and they literally crimped the end of the cable, put on an RJ45 connector, and extended the cable outside. So it was that my RJ45 connector outside had gotten, the elements had gotten to it, the humidity, the water, it had rusted up. I cut the end of it. I put another RJ45 on it with a crimper and just connect the cable up. And later on, I had someone just do a full run all the way through to see if we can get that fixed for good. Your answer here indeed was E, TDR, the time domain reflectometer. If you aren't one of the 49% that answered that one, got that one absolutely right. And the people in the chat room are correct. The TDRs are expensive. You're going to find them anywhere from, you can get a low-end TDR for a couple of $100s. Most people are getting a TDR that's around $1,000, $1,500. There are, of course, TDRs that are much more expensive than that, but for the use that we have in most corporate environments, you probably have one that's from $1,500 to $3,000 for the TDR. And of course, if it has optical, then the numbers go up from there. You're doubling the numbers depending on the capabilities you need for optical. It could, of course, cost a lot more if you're needing much more precise and varied optical connectivity. So very, very useful to have that. Let's do another question. Let's jump into another Network Plus question. Good job with that one. This is one hopefully some of you will already be familiar with. We'll talk more about this one in a moment. The question asks, a network administrator is describing a communications issue as a layer 3 problem. Which of these would most likely be associated with this issue? Would it be A, a fiber cut has occurred between buildings? Is it B, a switch loop has caused an outage? Is it C, a routing table has an invalid route? Is it D, a TCP port is being filtered at the firewall? Or is it E, an application bug has crashed the server? Those are your 5 options. A network administrator is describing a communications issue as a layer 3 problem. Which of these would most likely be associated with this issue? Is it that a fiber cut has occurred between buildings? Is it a switch loop has caused an outage? Is it a routing table has an invalid route? Is it a TCP port is being filtered at the firewall? Or is it that an application bug has crashed the server? You think you know the answer? Please, no answers in the chat room, no hints in the chat room. Instead, go to professormesser.com/QA and answer that question right there. So hopefully you know what the layer 3 problem might be with those issues. Whenever I start working through these problems, we often use this terminology to try to explain to people what the issue is related to. And I do this all the time. This is something extremely common in the industry, is that we use terms like, oh, it's a layer 3 issue. It operates at layer 3. It has a layer 3 functionality. That is a very, very common way to communicate an abstract idea, especially for something that someone may not be familiar with something they absolutely can be familiar with. So that's the thing that makes these layers useful. We'll talk more about these layers in just a moment and how they are used. Let's see how you did with this one. I'm going to click these and see how we did. Well, you can see that 79% of you said that the routing table has an invalid route. 15% of you said a TCP port is being filtered at the firewall. 7% said a switch loop has caused an outage, and 0% on the ends that a fiber cut has occurred between the buildings and an application bug has crashed the server. Well, I fooled everyone with this. No, I didn't fool anybody. 76% of you answered C, a routing table has an invalid route. Well, that's exactly what the issue is. Whenever you hear layer 3, it's routing. It is an IP address. It's something relating to the routes that you're operating with. Anything relating to an IP address, anything relating to a route is a layer 3 scenario. It's a layer 3 technology you're working with. If you see anything that's an IP address, oh, it's an IP address or subnet mask problem, that's a layer 3 problem. If you have fragmentation issues or the MTU size, getting information back to back, now you're getting into spanning different OSI layers, but anything dealing with IP fragmentation occurs at layer 3. So that's where you would go to try to figure out problems relating to this. These OSI layers are really, really useful to know. So everything from layer 1 through layer 7, it's a way that we use in the industry all the time to communicate with people. So that's where I run into issues where people are trying to figure out, oh, here's this new application layer firewall. How does it operate? Well, it operates by looking at information at layer 7. So that's a good example of a firewall operating at layer 7. If it's an old school firewall that doesn't do anything but allow or block traffic based on a TCP or UDP port number, then it's a layer 4 device, layer 4 firewall. If it's a device that only does IP level filtering, it's a layer 3 device because the IP address. So knowing these different layers can help you communicate with others and explain how a particular technology is operating. So in the chat room, if somebody says TCP it's a layer 4, TCP and UDP are operating at layer 4. So if you have a firewall that blocks or allows traffic based on a port number, a TCP or UDP port number, that device operates at layer 4. And that's the term that we use for that. It operates at layer 4. It makes its decisions based on that layer 4 information. Now, is the firewall also connecting to the network at an Ethernet or fiber connection? Yes. So isn't it layer 1? It is not. I mean, it is using those layers to communicate, but we always talk about devices based on what their highest OSI layer happens to be. So if this device, and based on what decision making is going on. So of course, these days, our next generation firewalls are looking into the packets themselves, determining what the application happens to be. These modern firewalls are able to see if you are looking at Instagram or posting on Instagram, and they're able to see the differences in those two things. So that's a layer 7 device. It's able to see everything that is happening and make decisions based on what the application is doing, regardless of what IP addresses are in use, regardless of what port numbers are in use. Very, very powerful technologies, and they operate at a different OSI layer. As somebody who worked for a next generation firewall company, I would have to give presentations multiple times a day to people who are just trying to understand how these things work. And these are the terms that I would use. Like, oh, you have this firewall now, that's a layer 4 firewall. This is a layer 7 firewall. And people go, okay, worked in applications, I got it. Immediately, you're able to tune in to exactly the way that particular device works. So extremely useful to know OSI. I've gotten people that have sent me messages and said, why do we have to know OSI? It seems like this antiquated way to communicate. And in fact, it's been around a long time. I guess you could call it antiquated, but it is extremely valuable in the modern day to be able to describe these technologies and how they operate. So if you are someone who did answer C for this layer 3 problem that the routing table has an invalid route, the 77% of you got that one absolutely right. Well done. To have all of those answers there. Now, the challenge with Network Plus, of course, is that there's plenty of information to know about. You have to be able to understand the cabling and the wires, the different ways to plug in these connections, the different connectors themselves, the copper versus the fiber. But you also have to know about topologies. You have to know about the OSI model. You have to understand a little bit of security. There's subnetting inside of this. Now, there are protocols you have to know. There's command lines you have to understand. This is a very broad exam. People often dive into this thinking, oh, this is going to be a simple entry-level exam. And then they get into the exam objectives and realize there's a lot of information you need to know on the Network Plus. And you do need to know this information. I take every bit of the exam objectives, and I have everything in my videos. And I highly recommend you take notes. You're able to go through all of my videos and do that. I realize not everybody has the ability to go through every single one of these videos. You may not have the time. So there may be things that you miss in some of those videos. So what I've done is I've taken all of this information from these videos and I put it into a single set of course notes. These course notes have all of the details. In fact, here's the course notes right now. It's a PDF file. And I'll just cycle through the first few pages of this so you can see the index that's there. I break it out by the different videos that I have, so you can immediately go to the video name and see all of the information that's inside of that video, all of the graphics, all the port numbers, all of the mappings, everything that I have in my videos is in those course notes as well. This is also something that helps keep the lights on here. So some of you have said, I'd love to help you out with the things that you're doing. I like your free courses. I would like to be able to contribute in some way. I don't take people just giving me money. I want to give you something for your hard-earned dollar. So this is something I created that can not only have you help us and make sure that we continue to make high-quality training materials, but you also get these course notes in return, which is nice as well. These course notes also have a physical version. So I showed Mrs. Professor Messer the digital version, and she said, well, you need a book version. You need something physical that's a piece of paper. So this is exactly the same thing as the course notes that you get in a PDF form, but they're in a book version. High quality. They're all color, full color course notes. They are perfect bound, so it's like a softback book. And this is one that, how many pages are in this? There's a lot of pages. There is 66 pages inside of these course notes, these 8.5 by 11 course notes. Very useful to have. If you purchase the physical version, you also get the digital version for free. So while you're waiting for me to ship this to you, you can download that digital version immediately. The digital version is $20. It's a little bit more for the physical because we have to print it out, but it's another way to support what we're doing here. For those of you that have used these course notes, you've taken advantage of these, thank you so much. It's a really important thing to be able to keep all of this going, and it really does go a long way. So thanks so much for your ongoing support. You can learn more about this at professormesser.com/NPCN7, the Network Plus course notes for the N10007, or just follow the links on my website. The menus all have those links in there as well. Let's get some more questions in. I've got another one for you. This question asks, an application upgrade will require a 10 gigabit per second connection between servers located 70 meters away in separate buildings. What is the minimum category of copper cable required to support this connection? So there's your question about cabling. A lot of you are wondering about cabling. You know that the Network Plus exam has a lot of cabling on it. So here is this question about cabling that asks, an application upgrade will require a 10 gigabits per second connection between servers located 70 meters away in separate buildings. What is the minimum category of copper cable required to support this connection? Is it Category 5, Category 5E, Category 6, Category 6A, or Category 7? All of these are good things to know. So make sure you look through all of those different options, try to figure out what those differences are, understanding this piece. This is often a question you will be asked. You're the network administrator. We're upgrading all of these servers. They're in different rooms or different buildings. You do the math. You see that they're 70 meters away from each other, and they tell you it's really important that we're able to get 10 gig connectivity between these. We're going to continue to use copper connections because that's the cable that we have. Do we have a category of cable that's going to support that? Or do we have to run new cable? We don't want to have to pay for fiber, so figure out what category of cable we need. Go. Well, you need to figure out the minimum that you're going to use. Normally, generally speaking, as you move up in category, you also move up in price. So that is, otherwise we just put the highest category possible everywhere, and that's what we would use. But we don't always do that, do we? There's also complexities involved. There's different ways to crimp and different equipment that you would need if you were using a Category 5 versus a Category 6. So you have to think about that also when you're trying to figure out the details of this. So think about what you would put in. You can answer this question at professormesser.com/QA. Have a look. And of course, take a guess. This is something that I was discussing through an email thread earlier in the week, is that somebody took the exam and they didn't pass. And they realized afterwards they didn't answer all the questions. They left some questions blank. Never do that on the exam. The one thing we do know about the grading is that you get points if you answer a question correctly. You get no points if you answer a question incorrectly, and they don't take points away from you. The best we can tell is you aren't penalized for taking a guess. So if you took a guess and got it wrong, that's okay. You just don't earn any points, but they don't take any away from you. So there's no penalty for guessing. So before you hit the submit button or before your time runs out, go to every question you didn't answer and at least answer something. Put C on every single one of them, or just randomize it, or take your best guess and before you submit that. So at least there's a chance that you could get some points out of this. Of course, there's a chance you couldn't, I guess. But that's at least you're playing the odds. Don't leave it blank. So on this one, don't leave it blank. Take a guess at what you think it is, and you'll be able to figure that out. Yeah, maybe you're flipping a coin. Maybe you're just taking a stab. Maybe your default is C. You go with C every time. Maybe that's what you do. I'm not even sure that's even a valid, good idea, but it's up to you. Figure out what way makes the most sense. Let's see how we did with this one. We can see that 53% of you say it's category 6A. 26% of you say it's category 6. 12% said category 5E would work just fine. And then 9% said category 7. Only 1% said cat 5. Probably because you just don't see cat 5 anymore, do you? Category 5 was available for, in the big scheme of things, available for a relatively short period of time. There's a relatively small installation of category 5 that would even still be around. Because as soon as category 5 was out, we decided, let's tweak it just a little bit, make it a little bit better, and we'll call it category 5E. And that's pretty much what we've been using for the last, I don't know, 30? No, it would be about 20 years, just under 20 years. So maybe about 18 years has been category 5E. That's a long time to build out all of these category 5E. It's kind of hard to find category 5 in a network. If anybody's heard, if you're using cat 5 in your network, I'd love to hear from you just to get a feel for how many people still have some in the wall that you're using. Because between cat 5 and cat 5e, they effectively work exactly the same. There's minor improvements in cat 5e, but I would say for the vast majority of people, they will work exactly the same between all of those. So what is this? We need 10 gig a second. We need 70 meters away. What is really going to be the best answer? 54% of you think it's category 6A. And if you look at category 6A, category 6A does support 10 gig, 10 G base T. And it will do it to 100 meters, which is more than category 6, which also can support up to 10 gig speeds with 10 G base T, but only to about 55 meters, somewhere between 37 to 55 meters reliably. So if you need to go 70 meters, which was our question, you're going to have to go up to the next level of category cable, which is category 6A. The A stands for savings. No, the A is for augmented. So the 10 G base T, which is your 10 gigabit speeds, is 6A. So in the chat room, you're asking, so is 6A now the standard? They're all standards. You can still get category 5E, category 6, category 6A, and the newer category 7. You need to find the right category of cable for what you're doing. So that's why category 6A costs more than category 6. Category 6 costs more. We'll come back to category 5. Now you've already seen the next question, but we can look at that. So that's whenever we start trying to figure out what is the right fit here. Is the category 6A because you got 70 meters and you got 10 gig? That's the minimum you would need. Could you use category 7? Yes, you could. There's a lot of shielding in category 7. There's a lot more complexity with installing a lot of category 7. The category 6A would be the one to do there. So the question here, also in the chat room, what is the deal with these names? Category 5 was improved to category 5E. Was category 6 improved to category 6A? It did not work the same way. With category 5, between 5 and 5E, there were some minor tweak done. They said, well, you need to have this the cables twisted a little tighter. It needed to be a minor change to the specification, and let's now just start using 5E. There was never a choice, by the way, to choose between 5 and 5E. By the time 5E came out, we were just all using 5E. They got rid of 5 completely at that point. You didn't even have the choice. So your minimum, even today, is category 5E. If you were to look at category 5 cable that you have, and you probably call it, hand me the cat 5, if you looked at the cable, you'd see it's category 5E, because nobody has category 5 hanging around anymore. Category 5E. Now, category 6 is a particular standard. There were significant changes to category 6, which meant it was category 6A for augmented. It was not a minor change. It was a significant change, and we did not get rid of category 6 when category 6A came out. So there are differences in those. Today, you can purchase Category 5E, Category 6, Category 6A, or Category 7 to have all of those. So that's some of the background associated with that, a little bit of history for you to chew on. And by the way, this is another thing that came up even recently. Category 5 and Category 5E, basically the same cable. The changes were so minor that those two standards support exactly the same functionality. So you can run 100 base TX or 1000 base T on both Category 5 and Category 5E. There are numerous options on the internet that will tell you that you can't run gig speeds over Category 5. Of course you can, because you can run over Category 5E. Anything you can do on Category 5E, you can do on Category 5. That's what that is. And in the chat room, people also wondering, why the heck does it say bass on all these? Am I missing the song? Did somebody drop that? No. That is not what the base. It stands for baseband. If you think about we all often talk about internet as having broadband internet. That's what cable companies will tell you, the broadband internet. Broadband is sending signals through that wire at different frequencies. So we're able to send many different signals through the same wire using different frequencies on that same individual wire. Well, with their Ethernet cables, it's one single frequency. It's a baseband, so it's a single frequency that is sending that traffic through. So if you're using 10G base T, it's a single frequency that is sending that 10 gig baseband signal through twisted pair. Now, why is some T and why is some TX? Because the poor people writing the standards just couldn't figure out what they wanted to make it to. In reality, none of these terms are specific to anything else. It's just what they decide to call it. Quite literally, the folks that made the standards just decided they tried to keep some type of naming scheme. But if you went and looked at all of the different standards for 100 base, there's 100 base TX, there's 100 base T4, there's 100 base F, there's 100 base FL, there's 100 base. There's so many different versions. So it kind of is all made up. Matt in the chat room is correct. We just sort of decided what to call it, and that's what we called it. There's no set standard of why we called it that. It just is close enough for what we're doing there. So X is just an X. It's TX. That's what we called it. I don't know. Transmit, receive. Who knows what they were thinking to have all of those things there. The number in the front, generally speaking, is also the speed. So 100 base TX is 100 megabits per second. 1,000 base TX is 1,000 megabits per second. Or I guess 1,000 base T. There's no 1,000 base TX. And 10G base T is 10 gig, 10G. So at least you can kind of discern a little bit of what's going on with the standard based on the name. That might help you out. Let's do another question. I've got another one here for you. Let's do this question here. You just saw this question. It asks, a network administrator would like to gather ongoing performance metrics from network switches, routers, and firewalls. Which of the following would be the best way to obtain this information? Would it be SNMP, syslog, TDR, performance monitor, and CSU/DSU? Those are your 5 different options. So a network administrator would like to gather ongoing performance metrics from network switches, routers, and firewalls. Which of the following would be the best way to obtain this information? SNMP, syslog, TDR, performance monitor, and CSU/DSU. This is one of those questions where I could almost go with 2 different answers, I think. I kind of could go with 2 different answers on this one. But there's only one that I was shooting for. But I'll accept one of 2 on this one. How about that for another option? So 2 out of the 5 I will accept as correct answers. So there's one. I'm giving you a little bit of leeway. I'm just not happy with the answers I put on there, I guess. We'll have to figure that out. I should be clearer in the questions that I'm asking on these. Whenever I start going through and trying to figure out what the different options are going to be for these questions, I'm doing this in real time. I'm doing this as I'm sitting here at night or on a weekend. I'm putting in the questions and trying to figure out. I'm trying to get them close to what I want the answer to be. On this one, though, I think I'd choose 2 of them to be able to make that happen. Maybe you think the same way. So a network administrator would like to gather ongoing performance metrics from network switches, routers, and firewalls. Which of the following would be the best way to obtain this information? Would it be SNMP, syslog, TDR, Performance Monitor, or CSU DSU. 60% of you say it's SNMP. 16% say syslog. 20% said Performance Monitor. And in single digits, 3% for TDR, 2% for CSU DSU. Well, as I was thinking about gathering ongoing performance metrics, I'm thinking about using a management workstation. So I've got a computer. I've got that computer set up for with an application that is able to gather metrics from these devices on an ongoing basis and give me a status of how those particular devices are performing. The protocol that's using this to go back and forth to be able to gather that information is SNMP, the Simple Network Management Protocol. SNMP is widely used with many different applications to be able to gather the details from a database of information that's on these devices. We of course don't call it a database of information. We call it a MIB, a management information base, because database, I guess, just was too informative. We had to give it a special name, the MIB. So very often when you're configuring these workstations to gather information from a particular model of switch and a particular manufacturer of switch, you'll have to get the MIB for that switch so that your management workstation knows the proper terms to use to talk to that particular device. So you often have to find the right MIB to be able to have that work. Of course, there are different versions of SNMP as well. There's SNMP version 1, version 2, and version 3. A lot of people are using SNMP version 3 these days because it includes encryption. There's some bulk transfer. It's very efficient in its communication. And it's able to absolutely make things work a lot easier if you're doing anything relating to SNMP. Not everything supports SNMP v3. You may be using an older switch or an older router, an older device that knows nothing of SNMP v3. And in those cases, you'll probably have to use a different version of that. But it's able to ask information. You can't really see the router that I have up here because of my head. But here's my management workstation, which apparently is still using a CRT. That's important. It's asking how many bytes have come into a particular interface on this device. And this device responds back with, here's exactly the number of bytes that have come into that device. So this is one that really is useful. Being able to query a device, immediately get a response. And in some cases, you can graph things out. You can see a lot of detail with it. You're collecting this information over time. Some SNMP management stations can give you a nice little form, a nice view of exactly how a particular interface or device has performed over time. So that can be really useful too, have those there. I think that does come in handy. Now, in this particular question, I was a little vague because the question asked, a network administrator would like to gather ongoing performance metrics from network switches, routers, and firewalls. A very common way to take log information and transfer log details, which could include logs with performance metrics, would be syslog. Now, the answer I was really shooting for here, because I was saying ongoing performance metrics, that should automatically lead you to SNMP. But as I'm reading through it, I thought there's a corner case where what if the log has performance information in it? Well, syslog could have worked. Syslog very commonly used to transfer log data. And normally switches, routers, and firewalls don't have performance information in their logs. They have information about what type of traffic has gone through the device. They can tell you IP addresses that have authenticated. It can tell you that a particular interface was turned on or turned off. That's where those come from. So that's whenever I start looking at this answer, syslog probably not the correct answer here. I think I would take it in this case, because you could make an argument, what if this particular model switch kept performance metrics in the log? Aha. Well, I guess syslog would be useful to have that, but very rarely do you find that. If you want a chart like this, you're not going to get that from log files, generally speaking. You almost always get it from SNMP. But there are some logs. I can think of some logs with firewalls, for example, that do have some metrics that can help you. Maybe not performance metrics, but other details that would be very useful. So yeah, I should have probably been more specific with the question. Thank you, chat room, for your chastising. I am completely deserved of that. I'll do better next time. Performance Monitor is a nice utility to be able to gather performance metrics from Windows devices, but Performance Monitor won't tell you anything about switches, routers, or firewalls. So that's it. in that case. TDR, time domain reflectometer, we already talked about that earlier today. Not useful for pulling performance metrics. And a CSU DSU, a channel service unit, data service unit, is used for connecting to a wide area network link. Again, not used for gathering ongoing performance metrics. Now, the question you have is, doesn't SNMP pull its data from syslog? It does not. SNMP has its own process running on that particular device that is gathering real-time metrics for every interface on the device. Some of these devices have very extensive MIBs. They keep track of hundreds or thousands of different metrics on this device. And when you turn on SNMP, it has a process that it goes through. It's using CPU on that device. It's keeping all these metrics and statistics in memory. It's not writing any of these to a log file. If you were to power down that device and power it back on, you would be erasing all of the metrics that you had gathered up to that point. And the metrics are more of a real time. It doesn't keep a historical view of these, which is why you have to use your workstation. Let's go back to my picture. This workstation has to be checking in every so often. So I'll have this device, query that device every minute and tell me how many bytes have gone into a particular interface, how many bytes have come out of a particular interface, so that I can calculate some utilizations from that. And if I miss a query, then I've just missed that query for that minute. I have to pick it up the next time through. So you have to constantly be querying these devices. This is why these later versions of SNMP, like SNMP v2, had bulk transfers. So you could ask for 10 different metrics and it would tell you 10 different answers in one single conversation, rather than having to ask 10 times and get 10 different answers. It becomes very useful. So very useful to have that there. SNMP and the logs, two completely different animals that do not talk to each other. Almost never is there a correlation between those two. So very useful to have that there. SNMP. Now, SNMP, one more last thing. I know we're over time, but very quickly before we finish up, if you are watching this for continuing education unit credit, there is a special process you have to follow to be able to receive a digitally signed email from me, and here it is. You must follow this process. You have to go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. There's a Contact Us link. Click that Contact Us link. Put your name, your email address in there. And in the subject line, if you could put that this is the July 2019 Network Plus Study Group, and the super secret code word of the month, put SNMP in there as well. And in the body of the message, you can put anything you'd like. I'm reading through all of these. I'm not always able to respond back to all of them, but I do read through everything that you send me. I read through everything. I read through all your tweets. I read through all your Instagram comments. I read through all your YouTube comments. I read through all of it to be able to see that there. And if you do that, I'll send you back, usually in about a week or so, a digitally signed email that says you must have watched this because you followed those instructions perfectly. If you don't follow the instructions, you don't get an email back. So that's the important part with all of that. Make sure you do all of that right to have that there. What is an SNMP trap? We didn't really talk about traps in this. We only talked about this device is set up to query a device and get a response back. But in many of these devices, you can tell the device, hey, if you ever reach a point where the number of bytes in a particular time frame happens to be 1 million, it would be great if you told me about it. If you sent me an alert that told me that something really crazy just happened, send me an SNMP trap. That's what that alert is. I don't know. Again, why don't we call it an SNMP alert? I don't know. We called it a trap. That's why. Because we couldn't call it a database and we couldn't call it an alert. We call it a MIB and we call it a trap. Because what would you have to learn? What you'd just be sitting around knowing immediately what we were talking about. One of the things that you have also in SNMP with these traps is you can look for other things to happen. If an interface turns off or becomes disconnected, it's nice to get immediate information. Oh, let me send out a trap to my workstation to tell it, hey, I just had an interface. Even though you weren't querying me, I want to be proactive with you and let you know what's going on with those. So pretty useful to have that there for the SNMP trap to go through it. Now, I talked a lot, so let's do another question. I know we're in overtime, but I want to get another question in before we're done. We'll get one more here for Network Plus. Our next question asks, an attacker has installed malware onto a server that will delete all operating system files at noon on payday. Which of the following would best describe this attack? Would it be social engineering, phishing, logic bomb, man in the middle, or spoofing? Those are some you have to worry about. So an attacker has installed malware onto a server that will delete all operating system files at noon on payday. Which of the following would best describe this attack? Would it be social engineering, phishing, logic bomb, man in the middle, or spoofing? So here's the question. Those of you in the chat room, if you're struggling with some of the things that are happening with your YouTube link, you've got the cog wheel right at the bottom. You can change the resolutions. Maybe that would help you. As I mentioned earlier, I just send YouTube one signal. They now send it to you. So it's between you and YouTube at this point to getting all of those things working. Hopefully you're able to work through those by getting it. Sometimes the lowering of the quality can help you. It uses less bandwidth to have that there. So an attacker installing malware into server, deleting all operating system files at noon on payday. How dare they? Which of the following would best describe this attack? You know, one thing that's in the Network Plus exam is a whole section on security. So this is one of those security questions. Let's see how you did with this security question. Whoa, this one was not hard for many of us. 96% of us say that's a logic bomb. A logic bomb. 2% said it's social engineering. 2% said man in the middle. 1% said spoofing. Nobody said it was phishing. Everybody said that's a logic bomb, and that's a pretty good example of a logic bomb, where malware is on a system and then there's some predefined event that occurs that fires off the bomb. That usually it's pretty significant. Usually it's not just it puts a message on the screen. No. Usually it's somebody who has a grudge. They're very angry. They now have caused a issue. And the reason we call it a logic bomb is that it really has something bad that happens. Sometimes it's time or date. Maybe somebody changes a file. Maybe something happens with it that becomes a significant problem. So you want to go through and have a look at your systems and see if, and there's plenty of stories, by the way, you can also look at. If you just Google logic bomb, you can see really good examples of these. And I have some in my video as well, where it's looking for a particular time of day. And when that time of day occurs, something happens. It deletes operating system files. It transfers information. It encrypts data. It causes systems to reboot. There's all kinds of different things that could occur because of this logic bomb. And so many different things that can set off the bomb. This is a very good example of it. It's a time of day. It's noon on payday. As soon as noon hits, it's a logic bomb. So that's when you run into issues trying to figure out what could this problem possibly be, what is really going on. Logic bombs are a problem. It's tough because logic bombs are often not a known entity. There's no signature for a logic bomb. There's no predefined logic bombs that people can download and use. So you're not going to catch it on an IPS. Your antivirus isn't going to catch it. Somebody usually are making these things from simple scripts for it to happen. So you can't know that it's coming. It just happens. You have to be prepared for when it does happen that you can recover from it. Always have a backup. Always, 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 always have a backup. How many times do we have to say that we always have to have a backup? Always make sure you have a backup with those. So extremely important to have that there. And in this case, the 94% of you that chose logic bomb, you were spot on with that. You got that one absolutely correct. So make sure you're familiar with all of those security settings. That comes from section 4.4 of the N10007. Make sure you're familiar with those different security options as well. And not only that question, but all the questions we went through today came directly from the Network Plus exam objectives. Make sure you go to professormesser.com/objectives or just type into the Google machine CompTIA exam objectives, and you'll be able to download these. They have everything in them. If you take nothing else away from this study group today, take away that you need these exam objectives. They will help you more than anything else you are using. They will help you more than my videos. They'll help you more than the book you're reading. They'll help you more than the QA that you're doing. Extremely useful to have those there. We do one of these study groups every month. I have another one in August the 21st. We'd love to have you come back. We do study groups usually almost every week. So next week at this time, we're doing a Security Plus study group. Last week was the A Plus study group. We did 2 of those last week. Where were you? We need you back here. Now, if you're watching this video and it's well past August the 21st, you can always find out when the next live event is going to be by going to my calendar on my website, professormesser.com/calendar, and you'll be able to have a look at when I will be live next time. Don't forget about all the links to get to professormesser.com. Follow me on Twitter. Have a Network Plus pop quiz question every week. There's also all of my Network Plus videos at professormesser.com/YouTube. Don't forget about the Instagram. I'm going to start putting some Q&A on Instagram. My marketing manager, Lori, and I are doing some work with that right now. You're going to love it. I've already got a Network Plus question out there right now. I think the last thing I put on Instagram was a Network Plus question. Go have a look at professormesser.com/Instagram. And of course, the thing I kind of mentioned at the beginning was the professormesser.com/LinkedIn, my LinkedIn page, which has practically nothing on it because I literally made it yesterday. But we will start adding content as we go, of course, so you'll be able to see that. Don't forget about my course notes. You can find out more info on those at professormesser.com/NPCN. And I already mentioned the calendar. Don't miss that. Thank you for being here in this first hour. Stick around. I'm going to put up a slide here real quick, and then we're going to shift gears and do the call-in show. So we're going to turn this whole thing around where the questions are now coming from you, and I get to do the answers. We'll see how well that turns out. Thanks for being here this time. We love having you here. We will see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group. Well, let's see if I can make this work. Here we go. You can absolutely do questions in chat. You do not have to call me. I have children. They just text me when they need something. Yeah, but they're sitting across the table. That's okay. I'll take your text. Well, at least we're communicating, right? So absolutely put questions in the chat room. I am going to start up the phone lines, though, right now. As you're looking here, I will get these up and running so that I can start the show as this. I have to do a few extra things on my side and submit some forms and get this ready to go and log in, start the show. There we go. Start the show. It's all in the cloud. I have to do my own information into the cloud. And have all those things there. Let's talk about UDP and authentication and SNMP right now. You can absolutely put questions in the chat. I'm watching them come through, so that's where those are coming in. Let me call into my own show so that you can call into my show. So this will take me just a second for me to Skype in and do all of this. I have to hit a few buttons on my side, and this says,
enter your 6-digit PIN number.
Well, I'll do that. Why is it 6 digits, and why is it a PIN number? That sounds redundant.
Welcome.
Well, that seems to have worked, though. She seemed to like that okay. And that means that you could also call in, because now the phone lines are open. If you're in the continental U.S., the phone number is 855-785-7545. That's a toll-free number anywhere in the U.S., 855-785-RJ45. If you are on Skype or somewhere outside of the continental United States and you would like to call in, absolutely free, no Skype minutes are required. You put a +1 at the beginning of that. So +1, 855-785-RJ45, +1, 855-785-7545. That's the number for that. Well, the only thing I do not want you to put in chat, and thank you for asking, are sample test questions. We do not want to have sample test questions in the chat. Those are written by somebody else. They could be written by me, but they are copyrighted materials. But if you have a question about the topic that is covered in the sample test question you're struggling with, just ask the question. That's what we should do, to have all of those things there. Let's first go through a question in the chat room that had a question about SNMP v3 and SNMP and the SNMP protocol and how it operates. And this is one where we were talking about this, I think, kind of in, I think it was in the Reddit CompTIA Discord the other night, where we were talking about UDP and TCP. And somebody was mentioning, why do we use UDP with NTP? Why do we use UDP generally with SNMP? Don't we need two-way communication? Don't we need some type of conversation? We do. But TCP and UDP aren't about how you talk. It's only about what you say, if I could say it that way. So if you're talking to somebody on the phone, maybe let's say you're watching a movie with somebody over the phone. We've all done this, right? So you got a friend, you're watching a movie together, maybe it's on broadcast television, and you started the stream at the same time, and you're on the phone together, and you're just talking to them. Oh, I like this part where he goes in the door. This is the part that always makes me crazy. They're not really saying anything back to you, but they heard every word you said. It's okay that they didn't have to say, whenever you said, oh, I love this part when they go in the door, uh-huh. And this is the part, oh, this is so scary, uh-huh. They don't have to say, uh-huh. You know that they're hearing you. And for the most part, 99.9999999% of the time, our networks are running just fine. We do not have to get a response from the other side confirming that they received what we just sent to them. Well, I know you got it because the network's running fine. You don't have to tell me every time. And that's why we created UDP, so that I don't have to get a response every time. I know it got there. I know it's fine. Sometimes we think that UDP is somehow a less capable protocol than TCP. And the reality is UDP is actually better because it's faster. It doesn't require a lot of overhead. You just send it and you're done. And for the most part, our networks are fine and they get through. There are some applications, though, where being able to make sure the data gets to the other side is so incredibly important. And in those cases, we might use TCP. But SNMP is usually kind of a bonus thing. SNMP doesn't have some type of criticality associated with it. If we were to send information, a SNMP request to a router, and the router somehow didn't receive that request, there was congestion on the network and the packet was dropped, and we just didn't get those stats. It's not the end of the world. There's nobody performing a bank transaction from that. We are not setting parameters on a piece of industrial equipment. We're just wanting to know what the throughput is of an interface on a router. That's UDP all over. And it's also very low overhead. The last thing you want to do when you're managing devices is to also put more of a burden on your network. So imagine every time you wanted to ask your router for a piece of information, hi, router, let's have a conversation. Well, that sounds good to me. You want to have a conversation? I do want to have a conversation. Okay, now let me send you the question I have. And then you get the response back. Now that I've gotten the response, let's finish up the conversation. Okay, we can finish the conversation. Why did we just go through all that? Why didn't I just ask, hey, tell me what stat is. Here's the stat. That was it. That's UDP. That's the difference between TCP and UDP. So you can see now why UDP, especially with SNMP, pretty nice to have that ease of use, that simplified conversation. Makes it so simple. Now, obviously, there's speed differences too, and there's some applications where you just can't retransmit data if you lose it, like a phone call. If you're on a phone call, that's real time. If there was some congestion on the network and part of the phone call dropped, we've had those phone calls before, you can't have that information somehow retransmitted to you. We couldn't have had, no. You have to just say, hey, you dropped out a little bit. What'd you just say? And they have to say it again. So that's why we say whenever we're talking about UDP and TCP, there are some very functional, useful things that UDP does so much better than TCP. Don't start thinking that a protocol using UDP is somehow lesser than. It is in no way lesser than. In fact, it's probably best that it's configured that way and much more efficient to have that there. There are some other questions that came through about ATM, ISDN. I see all those come through before. Also questions about authentication protocols, Radius, TACAX, Kerberos. Let's talk about those in a moment. But first, let's go to the phone calls. 310. Hello, caller. Thanks for being there. There you are. I heard the beep myself. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Professor. I am Q, and I'm calling you from Los Angeles. Let me just put the volume down on my computer
Sure.
so there's no echo.
Good for you. What can we do for you, Hugh?
Yes. So I had a career question. It's not related to Network Plus, and I was just wondering what your take on this question was.
Sure, fire away.
The question is that I am currently enrolled in the Business IT Management degree at WGU, and from an employer standpoint, I just wanted to see what your take was, because when I go on Indeed and stuff, I see a lot of companies posting just a bachelor's as a minimum requirement to get into an IT industry. Now, my focus was cybersecurity, but the degree that WGU offers is very, very technical. There's about 12 certifications that they take you through, which involves Network Plus, Security Plus, 2 Cisco certifications, and there's an ITIL. So I was just wondering if I would choose the business side of the IT management, and then once I'm done with that degree, because it's an accelerated program, what if I choose to do these certifications, which I find fit for me on my own once I'm done with school? Because if I get done with this degree, what I got from the counselors over there is that you will start, no matter what, from an entry-level position. So even if I go with the cybersecurity degree, you would still start from an entry-level position. So what's your take if you take a little business and IT management degree and then do the certifications that you want to do?
Well, this, interestingly enough, this particular question right down my alley. I have a business management degree. In fact, I don't have an IT degree. It could be argued back in the day when I got my college degree that computers did not exist. This is not true. This is people making fun of me. But there were computers at the time. In fact, there were extensive computers. When I was in college, I worked at a supercomputer center with supercomputers that were liquid nitrogen cooled. That was how we cooled them back then. They got so hot with their calculations they were doing that we really did cool them with liquid nitrogen, and we had a cryogenerator in the back room, I'm not kidding, that would refreeze the liquid nitrogen so we could send it back through the supercomputer again. Personal computers were absolutely a thing. The university I went to, Florida State University, had an IT management degree at the time. But the IT management degree, and in fact, many of the IT management degrees still at some of these 4-year traditional state universities are nothing more than a management focus, and they send you to some programming classes, which that's not how IT works, by the way, for you four-year universities that are putting together these different types of materials. So I just got a management degree, even though I was really interested in technology and computers, and I knew I wanted to do something with computers. I felt that programming was not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be on the IT side, not the computer science side. So I just got a management degree, and right out of school, just as you said, I had to get an entry-level position. There was not a huge emphasis in security at the time. That was not a thing quite yet. There was no internet back when I got out of college, so security was not the same type of thing either. But you have to start there at those lower levels because let's just take IT security as an example. I don't use the term cybersecurity because it doesn't mean anything. We don't have any cybers to secure. There's no such thing as a cyber. So whenever I talk about security, there's so many different areas of security that when somebody says cybersecurity, I have to ask, do you mean creating applications that are secure? Do you mean performing penetration tests on existing systems? Do you mean protecting systems that are in a network? Are you talking about firewall management and VPN? What do you mean by cybersecurity? So when I talk about IT security, I'm really talking about the side where you're focusing on either protecting or making sure that data is protected in these organizations. The other side of this is probably the programming side, creating applications, making those applications secure, being able to take malware, deconstruct and decompile the malware to see how it operates. That's computer science. That's a completely different section of technology that is incredibly interesting and important, and people work along those lines. But when we talk about what we're doing with Network Plus, A Plus, Security Plus, and these other IT certifications, we call them IT certifications because we're talking about IT and not programming computer science. So whenever I look at the industry, you had mentioned this point that some of the 4-year degrees look at these things at a broader scope that A lot of the things that you are doing with your management degree are very technical. And I would argue, you sort of made this, I would argue that IT is a technical job. Even managers in IT need to be very technical people to understand how to implement, design, plan, and have the right people in place to manage all of these technologies. The people that are CIOs, the very good CIOs, are very technical people. So this is not a case, we often think of managers as not being smart people, but the reality is I work with tons of organizations and all over the world, and every CIO I've met, maybe except for one or two, really knew what was going on. These are smart people that have done this a lot, that have come up the ranks themselves from somebody working in the help desk, moving into working with servers or workstations or networks, and eventually getting into security. The thing with security, and that was the other question you had, which is we generally don't have a lot of starting positions, entry-level positions in security. It's not that there aren't any of those out there. There's just very, 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 very few. And they're generally for somebody who at least has some experience in the field. That's because security itself, IT security, has an enormous foundation that you need in operating systems and especially in networking. On top, you layer the security on top of those things. So once you get into security, you're going to be working on firewalls. You're going to be implementing firewalls, and there'll probably be redundant firewalls that need to integrate onto your network at layer 3. So you're going to plug these things in. They're going to have IP addresses. There's going to be some failover process that occurs. These devices may also be routing for your network. So you need to understand how routing works. You need to understand network address translation because your firewalls are probably also doing network address translation. Your firewalls are probably also connecting to other third-party sites over an IPsec VPN. There is routing and IP situations and things you have to know, configurations associated with that. So a huge section of what you're doing on this firewall, a lot of your time is networking. Eventually, you're going to get to the point where we actually have to put some security rules on this device and make sure that it's secure. But just to get to that point, you have to take these years of experience that you have in operating systems and especially networking to be able to use this at a security level, which is why people will tell you, as you mentioned, you're probably not going to get an entry-level position into security. We're going to take somebody from the network team, pull them into security. We'll take somebody from the help desk, move them into the network team, or somebody from the workstation team, move them into networking. Somebody from the help desk, move them into workstation. And now we got an opening in the help desk. That's the opening you're looking for, so that you can then follow a similar path to be able to eventually get into that security role. It sounds like you're taking the right things. It sounds like you got the right idea and the right technologies. You've got operating systems. There's plenty of Cisco networking in there. You've got all the right things as a baseline that you are learning right now to move into these roles. And you're probably going to start in a help desk role or something, a service desk, something similar. And then eventually you're going to move up in the ranks. And maybe you decide you would like to have a management degree. I eventually moved into systems engineering management. I had got a 4-year degree from a big university in management. I moved up the ranks of my company. I became a manager. I hated it. And as my boss said to me, turns out I'm not really good at it either. I was awful at being a manager. He was very good at telling me this, and thankfully, demoted me back to being technical so that I could really do what I enjoyed. And as it turns out in our industry, you can make a lot of money, do whatever job you want to do, live anywhere you want to live, and be someone who does technical things. You don't have to move into management to be successful in IT. As much as people will often tell you that's the case, it's not really true. So I became extremely happy after that, just being a technical person and saying, I'm going to be the best SE I can be, learning as much as I can about this technology. As it turns out, the more you know, the more valuable you are, the more people want to talk to you. So that worked out okay. It did not seem okay at the time, but it turned out okay. So whatever you're planning, it sounds to me you have an extremely good foundation that you're building. Now it's just up to you. You'll get out of school, you'll get that first job, and now you just kind of follow wherever it takes you, which is probably going to be a combination of what you're interested in and what your opportunities are. And eventually I have a feeling that's going to lead you right into security.
Okay. Yeah, I am the complete opposite of, of what you just said. I feel like I would be more comfortable in a manager position or knowing all of the IT solutions.
Perfect.
Some people are good at technical stuff.
Yep.
I just don't see myself hanging in a server room fixing servers and switching wires. I feel like I'm more of a people person.
Perfect.
And
I work with some managers. Once I was not a manager anymore, I got some managers. The managers I worked with in these organizations, that was my boss, and I went 2 or 3 or 4 different places and had different managers. These were fantastic managers. They took care of us. They did the things that we needed a manager to do for us. And not only those roles are good ones to consider, but roles like a project manager is also a good way to move up the ranks too, because I think project manager, maybe even more than a manager of a group of people, a project manager is even more of a challenging position. Those are jobs that are incredibly important in IT because somebody at some point, I'm a technical guy. I know what has to be done. And I don't have to worry so much about the numbers, or at least back when I had that job, I didn't worry about how much money it cost to do that. I would give that to the project manager and said, go talk to the CFO and see if you can get some money for us so we can get these servers and get this project done. So it was their job to kind of figure out, why was this important? How does this technology solve the overall problem? And now, have we got the right solution for the money that we're going to need to solve it? And if we don't, how do we fix that? And so you have to have some technical knowledge to be able to make that happen.
Right. So would you suggest getting a bachelor's in IT management and then getting the certification of your choice based on what you like? Like if it's networking, take the Network Plus and then the Cisco Plus route, or if it's security, take the Security Plus and CYSA and all of that. Would you recommend that?
My degree in management worked well for me. I think an IT management degree these days is a little more focused on what IT is actually doing. So that's a very good path. As for what certifications you combine with that, that's going to depend on what you need to do first. Generally, I recommend that people get whatever certification gets them to their next step, because the certifications you're going to need for your first job will be very different than the certifications you're going to need for that second job, and probably even for the third job after that. The scope is going to change. Your goals are going to change. The people you work for are going to look for different things. And sometimes what they're going to want from you are different than what you thought you would be going through on a certification path. So I often say, to get that first cert, find out what the employer is looking for, or on the jobs you're interested in, what most employers are looking for. Are they looking for A+? Are they looking for Network Plus? Are they looking for Security Plus? If you worked in Washington, D.C. and you were doing Department of Defense, they probably would want Security Plus. If you were working in Washington State, they may not want Security Plus. Maybe a completely different scenario. So find out. You may have to do a little research in your area and look at the job postings. Find out for the job postings you're interested in, what do they want? That will help lead you down the path of what cert you might need. You may find that getting a Cisco certification is way overkill, or you may find that everybody seems to be asking for the Cisco cert. That should answer your question for you.
Yeah, I'm looking at Sony Pictures internship that they just posted for the fall. And their qualifications right now is just a plain currently pursuing a bachelor's or a master's in a relevant area. They didn't specify if it has to be a cybersecurity major or something. So, I was just thinking if I can see what I really want and then, go from there, because the WGU program is so heavily certification concentrated that I feel like I'm going to get stuck. If I don't pass that one certification, I'm just going to be like, oh my God, why did I choose this program? I should have just gone for this management degree 6 months ago.
Exactly. There are other places you can go that have a focus in technology, but don't necessarily have a focus on certifications. WGU does have that model where they put you through a lot of certs. In the process, you are learning the technologies. There are many other places you can go that are not traditional four-year universities that have a major focus in technology, but instead are focusing on you learning it in a college or university environment without the pressure of the certifications on top of it. So those are out there, and an IT management program is a perfect fit, it sounds like, for what you would like to ultimately do in these organizations. Why not go that direction? You got plenty of time after that to earn whatever certifications you might need, which ultimately is what WGU would have done for you anyway.
Right. Last question. I know this is a very long call. Money.
I'll take some. Yes.
Cybersecurity.
Oh.
Someone coming out with a cybersecurity degree, monetary-wise, compared to somebody coming out with an IT management degree, with no certifications. What do you feel like monetary value of that person? How would that differ?
It's tough. As I mentioned, there's not a lot of entry-level security jobs out there, and when you say a cybersecurity degree, I'm not even sure what that is. Because is that programming? Is it somebody using a firewall? Is it that's a very broad term, and I understand that's what a lot of organizations call it these days. But unless we have clarification, we're not entirely certain. But in either case, regardless of what the actual nuts and bolts of that degree happen to be, there's not a lot of entry-level positions in security. So the same people coming out with a cybersecurity degree and someone coming out with a generic or even management IT degree are all going to be competing for the same jobs because you don't jump into security generally right off the bat. The thing that I would probably recommend, though, is once you were asking specifically about the salaries involved with this, is the upward mobility part. I would think somebody in cybersecurity ostensibly would have more knowledge in security. This may not necessarily be the case because security is a moving platform. Not everybody knows everything there is to know about security. And quite honestly, the more you work with these technologies, the more you're going to know anyway. So if you're someone who just has an IT management degree and you are able to get into a position that does a little bit of firewall management, a little bit of IPS administration, working a little bit with VPN connectivity, understanding the authentication processes for your organization, working on the security policies and making sure that all of these things are documented, working with your SIM. Those are all things that will lead you down the path of making more money in a role that has to do with security. As I mentioned, I started as a management degree with zero technology in my degree, and I worked into a level, I felt I was in an elite level of systems engineers with one of the newest technology companies, really the hottest technology company in the last 10 years in security, and was able to do extremely well in that position, having no formal degree in technology at all. So what happens after you get that job and how much money you make in IT, that's completely up to you.
Gotcha. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer all my questions, and you have a great day.
I appreciate the call. Thanks very much, and best of luck. That's a good position to be in if you're trying to figure out what are you going to do in your future. And the beautiful part about IT is you just get to decide yourself. You can be extremely motivated there. Quickly back to the chat room, then we'll take this call. Thank you for holding for so long, callers. I see you there. There was some questions that came through in the chat room about ATM. And I realize ATM is still, for some reason, in the Network Plus exam objectives, which is sort of an odd thing to put in there. I can't imagine at this point, given what I have seen in the industry, that there's any more ATM switches going on out there. I guess you could make the argument that today's Sonnet has a bit of a foundation, at least on the STM side, working with the same signaling that would be going across fiber that we saw with ATM. And ATM is a technology that effectively is completely dead. I wouldn't say dead. It was kind of dead on arrival. It never really took off. We tried to use it in the industry, but as it turns out, Ethernet and VoIP were so much easier than implementing a brand new topology that half the time didn't really work so great anyhow. And the idea behind ATM was that there was these 53 byte cells We called them cells instead of packets because, as I mentioned, that's what we do in this industry. But think of 53 bytes going across the network. That's not very big. And once you put the header on the front of it, there wasn't much information left. You had about 48 bytes you could work with to send information down the line. And you were sending just tons of these down the line. It was just the weirdest technology. And it had some great ideas about blending together voice and video and data and seamlessly sending it from one side to the other. The reality is that the ATM technology required too much information, too much boxes being pulled out and doing complete upgrades of networks. We tried it. It just did not catch on. And ultimately, it's a technology that has gone the way of the dinosaur. Whenever you hear somebody talk about those ATM cells, the big benefit people say of ATM, of asynchronous transfer mode, is what I'm talking about, which is a networking type, not an automatic teller machine. Asynchronous transfer mode, the beauty of it is that every cell that came through was the same size. Every packet that came through the network was a 53-byte cell. So it was deterministic, we called it, which meant you knew exactly what was coming down the line. You knew exactly when it was coming. You knew exactly what it would look like, and you could pull all that in. Now, of course, our files and things we work with are usually much bigger than 53 bytes or the 48 you'd be left with. So where there was a lot of segmentation and reassembly associated with ATM or SAR. So the segmentation, we have to take data, segment it up into tiny little packets, cells, send those cells across the network, and then reassemble them on the other side. Why didn't you just send it that way to begin with? And that's ultimately what killed ATMs. That's what everybody asked. Why are we cutting this up to send it to the other side just to put it back together again? And there goes the way of ATM, unfortunately. Really interesting technology, though. I had a lot of fun with ATM. I was working at a packet. I was working at Sniffer at the time, Network General, with the Sniffer products. And we had ATM Sniffer products. It was crazy. The technologies you got into, really, really interesting. And ultimately just did not catch on. Gig Ethernet showed up and it was over. That was it at that point. Oh, I could just plug in a new network interface card and use the same fiber, same copper and everything. Okay, we'll do that. And that's ultimately how Ethernet kills everything, isn't it? With all of those. We'll talk about double NAT in a moment and how it does not work right after we talk to this caller who's been holding for a long time. Thank you, caller 661. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hello, Professor. My name is Luis. I'm calling from Long Beach.
Hi, Luis. Thanks for calling. What can we do for you?
Hello, Professor. I just had a hot tip for the viewers. I had to be a couple hard drives for some MacBooks, and I ran into a lot of problems. I had a 2009 MacBook Pro, and that one was the hardest one to clone the hard drive.
Wow, 2009. Good for you.
Yeah, well, they were trying to upgrade the hard drives from the spinning disk to the SSD. And if it was made after 2010 in the summer, you should be able to just pop in the new SSD and hold down the Command R, and it should go into internet recovery mode by itself.
Sure.
But the 2009 model does not have that option.
Oh.
And it took me forever to figure out. And I was able, the only way that I was able to do it was that Apple on the hard drive, they have 3 partitions, and one of the partitions is the boot recovery. So I had to use the eSATA to the USB while I had the original hard drive still installed, and I put the brand new SSD in the eSATA.
Nice.
And then I had to turn on the computer, hold down Command R, and then I had to make a what do you call it? Time capsule? What is it called on Mac?
The time machine? Time machine backup?
Time machine.
Yeah.
Time machine backup, and then recover. Once you go into recover mode, you can go to time machine, and you can recover time machine onto the eSATA.
So
and
was
then
the 2009 still
2009.
using, did it have a standard SATA connector then on the 2009?
Yeah, it still had the
Okay.
SATA 3.
Got it.
but on the side it had the USB 3.0, and I used a USB 3.0 to eSATA cable, and I connected the SSD SATA 3 to that cable, the new one, and I was able to recover from the recover console through Time Machine.
It's remarkable you were even able to figure it out. How long did it take you to figure out?
A week.
That's about right, I think.
I tried everything.
You finally cracked the code, though. And what ultimately got you to the point where, let me just rebuild, because you effectively kind of rebuilt it from scratch using a couple of extra things. What finally got you to that point?
Trying everything, and I wasn't able to get my hands on an original installation media disk.
That would have probably helped a little bit. That would have probably at least done the partitioning part for you. That's where you usually get it. Well, that's hopefully I'm not ever going to be in that same position, but if I am, I'm going to follow exactly the same path you did.
Yes. So if you're going to buy a MacBook, try to get after summer of 2010.
That's your important takeaway. I think that's a pretty good one too, because all of the recovery stuff, I guess, would be in the BIOS at that point.
Yes, sir.
Oh, good to know. Thank you for the call, Luis. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Professor.
That's don't you hate those situations though, where there's something, that one thing that you need to do to make that happen, and that particular model, the BIOS wasn't there. You had to effectively rebuild everything as if the BIOS was there, except you had to do it manually. Oh, I'm glad I was not you, Luis. I'm glad there's somebody out there doing it. But the 203 area code is here as well. Hello, caller. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Good morning, Professor. My name is Sharif. I'm calling from Silver Spring, Maryland.
Oh, from Maryland. Thank you for calling. What can we do for you?
First of all, I will say thank you very much for your videos that have been so helpful for me. Like 6 months ago, I decided to move into the IT field.
Nice.
So I watched your A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus, and decided to take the Security Plus certification because that's the requirement for most of the companies in my area.
Right.
And I just passed it.
Nice. That's what I mentioned earlier, that if you're in your neck of the woods in that DC area, Security Plus is such an important certification. Congratulations.
Thank you very much. And I would say thank you to you one more time. So now I'm in a position where, I have some friends that have been through the same path, and they just went straight to the security part of, the thing from, like, to the IT security part of it. But I wanted to start with, like, a type of help desk type of position. That way I will have, like, a lot of knowledge, and after that I can move into the security part of it, because that's the end goal. But most of, my friends, they just say, hey, don't take any help desk position, just try and get a security position. And so I was wondering, what advice what can you suggest me as far as that is concerned?
I am not one who is familiar with the market in the DC area as well as other people would be. But I think the same thing does apply quite a bit when you're talking about security specific roles. Because here's the ironic part of the Department of Defense requiring Security Plus as one of those fundamental certifications you have to be able to work or do things that are IT related for the Department of Defense and for the Department of the Defense vendors, is that there's not a lot of entry-level jobs that have anything to do with security. So you have to have a Security Plus certification, but you're still probably going to work your way into a role that is entry-level help desk whenever you get that first job. It's sort of the irony of the area. It's one of those weirdnesses of the federal government, is that you have to be able to, at a bare minimum, have Security Plus, but you're going to end up not using Security Plus in your first role in those organizations. So you kind of have to have both. You kind of have to have this knowledge of security to get the Security Plus certification, but then you're going to have to shift gears and try to get those entry-level positions that very often need the knowledge that something like an A+ or a Network Plus might bring you. There might be in your area, though, there might be more security-related entry-level positions in DC than there are other places. And that's pure speculation from my part, but it would make sense in that particular area of the country that would be the case. So that's where I would focus. At this point, it's almost like you're going to have to do some research and start doing very similar to the advice I gave earlier, which was go look at the open positions in your particular area that you're interested in. Find all the help desk roles, all the security roles, entry-level security, entry-level networking, entry-level help desk, and see what they're asking for. If they're asking for Security Plus, then you're set. But if they're asking for a Cisco certification, a Microsoft certification, you may need to do additional work to get those certifications under your belt or get the requisite experience in a help desk or entry-level role that can move you up into those particular areas. Those are the things probably that'll make the most difference. You're almost at the point where you have to figure out what they want first and then go that particular direction. Having a lot of people just try to get a lot of things and make a big list, not really understanding what the employers want. And ultimately, it's what the employers want that's going to be able to get you that first job or get you that better job.
Definitely. Yeah.
I think if you focus on that and do some research, just do a quick, you spend an hour on Dice, on Monster, on whatever the very popular posting site is in your area. Spend an hour, pull down about 10 to 20 different job postings, and just make a spreadsheet. What are they looking for? Are they looking for a degree? Are they looking for a certification? What certifications are they looking for? And see if you can get a consensus. There might not be a consensus. There might be just all over the place, and it's going to be a one-on-one situation where you're just going to have to figure it out as you go, or you might start to see some trends. And I think if you start to see some trends, you'll know exactly what direction you need to head.
Exactly. Well, thank you very much, Professor. I think once more, I will say thank you very much. Your videos were so helpful. And I enjoyed the Network Plus videos because they gave me like a lot of knowledge as far as networking is concerned. And that's actually why the Security Plus certification was much more easier for me, because most of those questions were kind of, related to the networking a little bit. Yeah. And that was really helpful. So thank you very much.
So true. Congratulations for that Security Plus. Nice job. Thanks for calling.
Thank you.
I tell people that all the time. It's so good to have someone else say it, is that to be successful in security, you have to have a solid networking foundation. I've already said it a couple times today. Folks in the chat room asking, how do you keep in contact from outside of what we're doing here? So, of course, on the Professor Messer website, there's a chat room, but there's other places where you could start gathering and keeping track of what's going on. These days, there's a lot of people using Slack and Discord. There's a very popular CompTIA Discord. If you go to Reddit's CompTIA subreddit, there are links to the Discord on the sidebar of the CompTIA subreddit. I check in there quite a bit to see what people are talking about. I'm check on LinkedIn. I check the subreddit itself for CompTIA, for Cisco, for Microsoft, for other certifications. Reddit, Discord, Slack, and other individual, more specific websites is kind of where I go for some of these things. There's not any single place, it seems. It's always a mixture of different things. Let's go back to the phone. 786. Thanks for holding. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, how are you? It's Manny from Washington.
Hey, Manny. What can we do for you?
Kind of infiltrated here. I'm part of your Security Plus group. I was just passing by and I saw you were live. Just wanted to ask I'm currently doing a internship with a major carrier here. And I came in thinking it's a security internship. Thought it would be risk assessment and threat hunting and stuff like that. And it turns out it's actually more of a DevSecOps, if you will. It's more cloud-based and it's more looking into APIs and such. I just want to know your stance on where do you see that DevOps, and if you believe in it. Is it something that you see growing in the future?
It is something more of the combination. What employers are trying to do is combine together the concepts of IT management and IT operations into automation. They're calling it development. They're calling it a DevOps type scenario. I don't think people are creating something new as much as they are finally giving a different name to what we've always done, which was create an automation, be able to script, be able to have these systems do things automatically when other things occur. We've been doing this in IT management forever. It's just been sort of the normal thing we've done. We've had all these scripting skills and what they call programming skills, even though scripting is not programming, and we can have that argument over and over again, but it isn't. You're not building an app. There's not a whole process involved at creating these things. We're just building a script and we're automating things, which of course is incredibly important and incredibly useful skill. And we should absolutely continue to do that. But I think some organizations think there is an actual blending together of programmers and operations, and there isn't, because programming is a science unto itself. And keeping systems up and running is a science unto itself. And the philosophies between those two are so separate that there's no possible way to combine them and have it work well. You can maybe find one person who might be able to blend those things together, but the skill sets are so different, so varied, and so much of a requirement of an individual that if you were able to develop an application and at the same time you knew enough to be able to provide the operations for that application, you're not going to be a good programmer and you're not going to be a good operations person. There's way too much involved at making both of those things work very well. A lot of companies have sort of thought you could, and they're trying that and they're failing. They're finding that it doesn't work so well. They're scaling it back and realizing, oh, wait, what we really need is an operations person who can automate, and we need a programming person who understands some of the requirements over on the operations side. But you're not going to find one person to do both of those. It's not working. People have tried it.
And here in this company that I'm on, actually, they're involving DevOps with security, and I'm actually taking a OWASP training with live machines attacking and defending, and it's all pretty interesting, but I don't really see any usage in the environment that I'm on.
I think the concept of DevOps, SecOps, I think the idea of taking what people know and automating it is not something new. We're turning it into something new. Maybe people think there's more money if you call it something different. Maybe people are finally getting the rightful rewards for understanding how to automate and create scripts. Which is maybe what we should have done this whole time. I think it's a great idea. In security, you're doing tons of scripting. You're writing to Perl APIs. You're writing to Python APIs. You're configuring scripts to be able to automate the information that you're getting from a firewall and building the virtual systems and throwing the virtual firewall in there. It's a huge part of what we do. And back when I worked as a systems engineer for the next generation firewall company, which at this point is more than 4 years ago, we were doing extensive scripting with APIs for these newer technology. It was just normal. That's what you were expected to know. It's taken this long for companies to finally realize, oh, that's a thing. We should call it a thing. We should emphasize that it's important, and we should do more of it, which I think the implementation and the use of cloud-based technologies has been the catalyst for that, and rightly so, and it should be. And for everybody listening, if you're not doing some type of scripting, you're not understanding Python, you're not working with Perl, you're not working on these scripts, even PowerShell, those are very, very powerful technologies. You should learn as much as you can about those. It's going to make your job easier, whether you're in server administration, network administration, or on the security side.
Awesome. Thank you. I'll get back to my scripting now.
I appreciate it. Thank you for the call. You're in the right place. What a great situation to be in as an intern for a major carrier and doing SecOps. I think that's fantastic. That's a great thing That's a great position. Learn as much as you can. You should be a sponge every day when you walk into that job. Just soak it in. Learn from the people who are already there and what they're doing and how they're doing it. You'll be able to take that anywhere. Back to quickly in the chat room, because you've been asking about it for a long time, and I've seen it, and I mentioned the double NAT thing. If you've ever been in this situation before, double NAT is when most of us have a connection from the internet into our homes. And we usually will put a router, an internet router on the side. Usually it's a wireless router, we call it. And that router is doing network address translation. It's taking a public IP address from the internet. It's firewalling, doing the network translation. And on the inside of your network, you have some private IP addresses. There are certain situations in corporations and other environments, or maybe even at home, where you have another router. I've seen this where people have put in the cable modem on one side, which happens to be a router that's NATing. And then they put their own router on the inside, which does a NAT again. So you're NATing from one private address range to a different private address range on the other side. And we call that double NATing. Does it affect your communication out to the internet? It does not. NATing takes care of that. All it does is has to perform the translation twice to get out. And when it comes back in, it performs the translation twice to get back to you. So there's their overhead. There's a little bit of overhead associated with that. For most of us, we may not even realize that it's there. We may not even realize that overhead exists. And removing it, you may not even see much of a performance change because the translation is happening so quickly and the information that we're sending back and forth is not a massive amount of information. But it is overhead, and it does limit what you're able to do. The problem you run into with double NAT is whenever you need to set up some type of communication from the outside to hit a server or a service on the inside, because then you would have to set up what we call a port forward on that exterior firewall, and that first device performing the NAT that'll get you into the inside. But then you have to put another one on the other device doing the NAT that gets you onto the inside of the inside, onto the double NAT. And that's where it's possible to do, but now it becomes complicated to keep track of this and figure out, wait, I know how to do the external one. And if you look at all the websites that tell you how to create a port forward, they'll tell you how to do it. What they won't tell you is how to do a port forward if you have two NATs, because you really shouldn't have that. Why are you doing that to yourself? So the answer when you run into the situation with a double NAT is don't do that. Don't do a double NAT. Get rid of one of those NATs. Hopefully you're able to do that. If it's your house, you can very easily do that. The way I do it in my house is the Comcast modem that I get comes as a layer 3 device. It routes and NATs as a device. And you have to go into the configuration of the device and say, stop being a router, just be a modem. I forget if they call it pass-through mode or bridge mode. There's some type of mode they call it. It's not really a bridge. It's really a pass-through mode. It's really a modem mode. If you want to get into pedantics of networking, it's not a bridge, but it is a pass-through mode that simply takes the public IP address, passes it all the way through, and then hits your router that you bought that then does the NAT. And now I'm doing a single NAT. It's much easier to configure based on that one thing. Can you do the configurations in a double NAT that would allow inbound traffic? Sure. You just have to figure out how to properly set the second router for the port forward, because it's no longer coming from the outside. It's coming from the inside. And you're port forwarding an inside address to a different inside address. So as long as you can keep those things straight, maybe you can handle the double NAT. The best answer is just get rid of it, because it's not giving you anything. There's no benefit from doing that. And ultimately it's causing you problems trying to get that to work properly. And work through those. How much of a speed hit is considered acceptable when using a VPN? I would say no speed hit would be acceptable. I don't like speed hits when I'm using a VPN. There's so many different places you run into performance problems with a VPN. There's the encryption decryption part itself on both sides. And of course, the connection to the concentrator, and then from the concentrator to where you're going, there's all of those stops along the way are potential speed issues. So that's one of those. And for anybody who's working through a VPN, you want all of this to run as quickly as possible. It's entirely possible to set up a VPN and really not see a real significant, if any, speed difference depending on the VPN type you're using. How do you fix the speed hit? You got to figure out where the hit's coming from. Is it your workstation? Is it the concentrator? Is it CPU overloaded? Is it the network connection between you and the concentrator? Is it the network connection between the concentrator and wherever you're going? That's the real question. That's why it's a complex thing to have to. It's a security issue, and now you have to be a network expert. How many times is this going to come up today? That's your challenge. You're now a network professional, and most of what you're doing, or you're a security professional, and most of what you're doing is networking. That is normal, and figuring out those pieces. Because then you have to layer on top of it all the encryption, the certificates, the authentication. Are you using Radius? Are you using TACACS? Are you using Kerberos? Which we'll come back to as well. There's other people on the phone. Can an ISP use double NATs for its clients? I guess it could. There are times when we have used a double NAT for a good reason. Maybe there is a connection from another location that's coming in that is expecting a particular IP address on the inside that we're not using. We're not even on that network. So we end up doing a double NAT to get it to the IP address that it needs to get to. There's places where having multiple NATs along the way are a good solution for what you're trying to do, or at least a good temporary fix. It's just not something you would like to continue to do if you don't have to. But as I mentioned, if it's permanent and it works, you're fine. You just have to manage the second NAT as it's going through. It's not like it's a bad thing. It's just unnecessary most of the time. It is necessary some of the time, and you will have to manage around that when it is. If you're setting up a home cloud server, you don't need to do double NATing. It's your home server. You have a public IP address on the outside, and you're done. You have a single router that you would manage that from. Back to the phone line, 661 is the area code. If I can click the button, there he is. Thank you for holding. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
I'm John. I'm calling from South USA.
Hey, John, what can we do for you?
All right. I'm applying to be for a sort of an entry-level IT position at a company I currently work for. I'm trying to move toward that position, and when I've interviewed for that, I'm trying again because I persevere. I really want that position. One of the interview questions I was asked is, a user has forgotten their password, cannot log in. What is the best steps to take to resolve that?
Is this a type of question they're asking during the interview process, and they're trying to get your mind frame, your mindset of how you would approach that?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. So users called in, they forgot their password. What do you do? And this is probably the number one issue you're ever going to deal with in a help desk. So I guess it makes sense they'd be asking this from you. From your perspective, what type of response, or what do you think the proper response of this would be? And there is no right, or I wouldn't say there's no wrong answer, but there's a number of right answers for this. Is there a particular path you have set in your mind that you think you would go down?
Well, let's see. This is more of, it's a giant network of computers. Each computer is a dummy terminal, so they connect to a network. And if someone comes to me saying, "Hey, can you help me reset this password?" What first thing I should really do?
I think the number one concern for anybody doing a password reset is this the real user for this password. Otherwise, it could be me. I could be calling you and saying, "Oh, hi, my name's Carol, and I forgot my password. Can you just reset that for me? Thanks." Well, my name's not Carol. So there has to be some type of verification process in place that you can confirm that that person happens to be who they say there is. That's probably one of the most important parts of password reset, is not the technical part of actually doing the password reset. It's that you're now the person in charge of doing this confirmation. It's sort of like when you call your credit card company and they ask you a lot of questions. Oh, what's your mother's maiden name? What address did you have this? What is the color of your car? All those weird questions they ask because they want to be sure it's you. And almost every organization is going to have some process, and they better have some process in place to be able to perform that verification. So the verification is probably the first thing that happens. Okay, Carol, let me go through the verification with you. Give me this information. And you can go through the process with them. At that point, it's easy. At that point, it's okay. Well, let's now take you through the reset, whatever it happens to be, if it's Windows or Linux or whatever system you happen to be using.
Okay. It's usually Windows, but I see. So to prevent social engineering attacks.
Absolutely. And you do want to be sure Carol's who she says she is. There's nothing weird going on with the account. How did it get locked? Did somebody else try to do a brute force on her account? Should be watching for this. Should we go through the logs and see what IP address tried to hit this particular account? Or Carol may know, like, I just typed it in 3 times wrong. I forgot what it is because we just changed it. We can go down that road too. And then, of course, you need knowledge if you're using Windows of the Active Directory front end and being able to find Carol in this enormous list of 10,000 users. How do you search for Carol? How do you find that account? And then how do you ultimately functionally change the password?
I see. All right.
There's some good YouTube videos out there, by the way, that have that. If you're trying to figure out how does Active Directory, how do you find these things? How do you change those passwords? There's tons of great YouTube videos on doing that in Active Directory and finding the things you need to find.
All right. Are there any other IT-related interview questions that are commonly asked?
There are. In fact, I just saw a few good ones.
Answer?
I think it was in the sysadmin subreddit recently where somebody had posted a list of questions during interviews. And if you do a quick search for help desk interview questions or entry-level interview questions, there's a smattering, a very common list of about 25 to 50 of these things to go through. And I think most of them are pretty spot on. They ask very broad questions about how you go about troubleshooting, not what you type into the keyboard, but what's your thought process around doing these things. So there's a lot of good resources out there for that. I highly recommend you find one of those lists and go through them because I found that they were pretty spot on for what I have seen in interviews as well.
Okay. All right. And are there any have there been any cases where even though someone did the verification process and it seems legit that they turned out to not be who they say they were, misrepresented and forced their way in anyway?
I would imagine there would be because nothing is 100% foolproof. And I think that's where you come to the point when you're working with some of these organizations that have very lax controls and no well thought out process for password changes, where you do run into these situations where people are able to circumvent the security. But I think for the most part, I think most people are very good. Most organizations are very good. They have very good processes in place for being able to work through these problems and solve them. If your processes are good and you have a good way to make sure the user is who they say they are, sometimes this is with an app on their phone or some mobile type of component, then you should be okay. You're not going to run into situations where somebody's able to circumvent those types of problems. That was a good question as all. I appreciate that. Thank you for calling. Let's get back to the phones. The 703, thank you so much for holding for so long. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah, okay. Because the earlier guy couldn't hear you. I'm not sure what was going on.
Oh, and just then you broke up a little bit. Holding for so long. I want to stick you. Let's try it again. Let's say you broke up there. Let's see if it's gotten a little bit better.
Okay, perfect.
Yep, sounds like a little bit better. What's your question?
Yes, so I'm calling from the D.C. area now. Or I don't have a question, but more of a comment. I'm not sure if they saw in the comments. The guy earlier that was asking about he lived in the D.C. area. I just wanted to let people know. I mean, there is always a lot of events and these meetups that happen, especially on the website meetup.com. And a lot of them I went to. Recently, I went to one about 5G and how that helps in government or whatever. And if somebody's trying to get jobs like those, I mean, this is one of the best ways. I recently went to one of them and I got a volunteering position for an IT help desk. Even though I don't have any certifications, but I still went to it, and I went to one of the events, and I was offered right there on the spot, even though it was not a hiring event. And yesterday, one of the events I went to, I met the deputy communication director of the DC area, the technologies officers. So that's one of the things that I would say is this is one of the best ways to go is to go to these meetups, random meetups. It'll take you 2 hours of your day. Most of them are in the evening time.
Yep.
And that's one of the best things. And that's what I found in the last couple of months while still studying for my certifications. I think that people...
It's a great tip, and one that I don't think people take advantage of enough, because the people in your particular geographical area who are already working at these companies, who are already working with these technologies, are going to these seminars. They're going to Microsoft user group meetings, Cisco user group meetings, ISSA user group meetings. They're going to these manufacturer presentations and technology presentations. It's a great place to meet people. Make sure your LinkedIn page is up to date. Interact with people who are there. Ask who they're there with. What do they do? And as you found, just by getting to know people there and getting some one-on-one FaceTime with them, you never know where those particular experiences are going to lead you. And you're able to get some practical experience right out of the gate just by going to a seminar in your area. I think it's fantastic.
Yeah, no, definitely. I really had no questions, but I've been watching it for a long time, and I've already answered all my questions in the past videos, so I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
I appreciate the call. What a great tip, and it's one that I mentioned over and over and over again, and I can't mention it enough because I have been the one doing the presentations at some of these user group meetings. I've been the one in the front of the room meeting the people who have come to the meeting. And the smartest people in the area are at these meetings. These are people I've met in normal business. We meet these people, we see them, and then finally we can all get together. We often think that the IT community is this massive, massive thing, and it's certainly a huge number of people in the community. But what you start to find in your geography, you start to see the same people over and over and over again. And usually once we get planted, we get married, we have a family, we don't like to move long distances. We have other people that we know. We have family in the area. So we tend to move from place to place to place within our own geography. We go from company to company. We might start in this company and work here a few years, then walk across the street and work at that company a few years. It's in the same geographical, the same at least area code. So it's at least you're in the same geographical area, but you know the same people and you see the same people all the time. And you start to know who those people are and where they are. And then you start to get your own group of people that you can rely on. This is the part that I always liked about the user group meetings, is that people who worked in this hospital could talk to people who worked in this manufacturing company, could talk to other people who worked in transportation and get to know each other. And although they're in different vertical markets, healthcare, transportation, whatever they happen to be doing, they were still using the same technologies. They had the same firewalls. They had the same authentication systems. They were using the same type of servers. They had the same operating system. They had the same concerns from an IT perspective. What a great way not only to have some people you can reach out to when you're looking for that next job, but also have someone you could talk to when you're trying to work through a challenge with planning, building, troubleshooting, or whatever it happens to be. And huge opportunities at these user group meetings that they have constantly. Cisco user group, Microsoft user group, VMware user group, whatever it happens to be. Find the one that interests you the most, go and then meet the people. Don't just go to listen to what's going on, although that's nice to be able to hear some of these newest technologies. 5G is an incredibly interesting one. So, of course, there are going to be people there for that. But you never know when you meet those people, what's going to come of that. So you have to be prepared. And that's why I often tell people, have your LinkedIn page ready to go so that you can say, oh, can I add you on LinkedIn? Can I get the same network? That way we can kind of keep up with each other. Very often the people who already have the jobs want your resume so they can hand that into HR. And if they hire you, they also get a finder's fee. So there's even a financial benefit for having some of the people you meet add you on LinkedIn and get the networking going, not the cable fiber networking, not the computer networking, get the people networking going. You will very often find that becomes the most powerful network you will ever work with in your career. It's remarkable. I've often told people on these user groups, and it's worth mentioning again, throughout my IT career, I had about 15 different jobs. Some of those jobs were within the same company. Some of those jobs I went to a different company, but throughout my career, I had about 15 different roles. The first job I ever got, I didn't know anybody there. I'm not sure how I got the job, but I got it. It was an entry-level grunt job. I delivered cables. I plugged in monitors. I drove all over the place. It was a grindy kind of job, but it was my first position, and that's kind of what you get when you're getting your first job. The other 14 jobs I got after that point, all 14 of them, I knew somebody who worked there when I got that job. That's how important it is. We want to hire people we know, or we want to hire people we trust. Oh, you know this person here? Well, I know that person. If it's good enough for that person, it's good enough for us. You're hired. That is pretty accurate to how it works a lot of the time. So make sure you take advantage of those things. Learn who's out there. Find out who it is. And as it turns out, they're pretty nice people too. They're nice people to know. They're people you're going to know throughout your career, that you're not just going to know them on LinkedIn. You're going to know them on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook as well. And you'll go through life together. As cheesy as that sounds, that's kind of how it works. Here, at the end of the day, it's human beings that are running the technology ship. And so it's really no different than anyone else. I want to thank you for being here on this study group. Thank you for the time you were here in the first hour with the Q&A. Thank you for your questions in the chat room and the things that you are asking on your call-in. We could not do this without you, and we are so glad that you're here. Please come back next week. We'll have our Security Plus study group, or come back next month. We'll do Network Plus all over again. We love doing these live streams, and we love to have you here. Thanks for being here this time. We'll see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group.